Ark Raiders is one of the most quietly strange and deeply layered games released in years, and today I'm taking you through 243 facts, details, lore pieces, and weird little corners of this world that most people walked right past. I put this video together because I spent a stupid amount of time in the codex, in the environmental details on the surface, and in community discussions trying to piece together what this world actually is underneath the extraction shooter surface. When assembling it, I made one deliberate choice. I leaned into the human stories rather than just the machine ones. There's plenty of content out there about how the Ark robots work mechanically. What I wanted to do was focus on the world these people built underground, the economy they invented, the slang they developed, and the quiet tragedy of people who never asked for any of this but kept going anyway. I also reordered some of the lore chronologically, rather than in the order the game drops it on you, because I think it hits harder when you follow it from the collapse forward to today. So that's the lens here, one interpretation, one read of a world that's still being written. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Chapter 1. The World Before the Machines. The world of Ark Raiders didn't start with robots. It started with us, and with the kind of slow catastrophic failure that doesn't make the news until it's already too late. Before the collapse, the civilization that existed in and around what we now call the Rust Belt was not just surviving, it was thriving in a very specific, accelerated way. The lore points toward a society that was on the edge of a golden age of space exploration, with launch infrastructure already in place and active across southern Italy. The Acera spaceport, which players can explore as a map location, was not built during the panic of the collapse. The scale of it suggests decades of construction and planning, which means someone was thinking about leaving Earth long before it became necessary. The region we now know as the Rust Belt was once a densely populated stretch of southern Italy. Place names buried in the environmental storytelling, things like Toledo Piazza and the buried city of Murano, north of Naples, suggest the geography is deeply real and deeply Italian. The glass domes of what appears to be a Naples subway station appear in the game's menu screen, almost like an introduction card to the world. It's a quiet detail that most players never consciously register. One reading of the lore suggests humanity was not caught completely off guard by the environmental crisis. The tunnel networks and underground infrastructure that became the underground settlements were already extensive. Someone built those before the surface became unlivable. The collapse was not a single event. The lore makes this clear repeatedly. It was a chain reaction. Earthquakes led to sinkholes. Sinkholes exposed underground cavities. Volcanic disruptions compounded flooding, and the air became progressively unbreathable in many regions. The environmental catastrophe appears to have accelerated a cultural fracture that was already underway. Those with resources began preparing private exits, while public infrastructure was still nominally functional. This is the origin of what the lore calls the Exodus. The Exodus was not spontaneous. The lore points toward a coordinated, pre-planned evacuation by the global wealthy and powerful. By the time the shuttles were lifting off from Acera, the decision to leave had been made years or possibly decades earlier. The people who built the launch infrastructure, the engineers and technicians who made the exodus physically possible, were in many cases not permitted to board the ships they helped construct. This detail is only implied in the lore, never stated directly, but the downstream effects of it shape everything about Speranza. The technical knowledge that survived the collapse in the underground communities almost certainly traces back to those left-behind engineers. The kitbash economy that defines Speranza isn't improvisation from nothing. It's inherited expertise applied to salvage. Celeste, the founder of Speranza, is described as a technical genius who made the survival of the community possible. The lore suggests she was active during the first wave, which means she was already an adult and already skilled before the worst of the machine invasions. What Celeste's background actually was before Speranza is not stated in the game, but the scale and sophistication of what she built underground, a city that literally hangs over a sinkhole abyss, suggests formal engineering training from the pre-collapse world. South Calabretta, the district that became Speranza, was swallowed by sinkholes during the collapse. Rather than being a liability, those sinkholes became the architecture of survival. The city was built into and around the voids that the catastrophe created. The phrase, "we don't live in the dark because we're afraid, we live in the dark because we own it," is attributed as a Speranza proverb. That framing, turning a limitation into a cultural identity, suggests the community has been underground long enough to have developed its own mythology. The first wave of Ark machines happened sometime after the collapse, but before the full underground settlement of communities like Toledo. The machines that arrived during the first wave were, according to the lore, significantly less advanced than the ones players face in the current game. The fact that first wave Ark machines were less sophisticated is important. It suggests either a manufacturing ramp-up, a learning process, or some kind of escalation protocol. The machines seem to have been designed to improve over time or to adapt based on what they encountered. The Battle of Victory Ridge is described as the culmination of the first wave. Raiders assembled there to fight off the remaining machines of that initial invasion and won, at least temporarily. The name Victory Ridge implies it was a human naming, which also implies survivors who felt they had won something. The period between the first wave and the second wave appears to have lasted somewhere between 20 and 30 years, based on the lore. That's a long time. Long enough for a generation of children to grow up who never knew the surface as safe. During that gap, the underground communities became real communities. They developed economies, social structures, and identities. The Raiders as a distinct cultural class almost certainly emerged during this period, when some people were brave or desperate enough to go back topside and bring things back. The second wave changed everything. Where the first wave's machines were beatable with enough coordination and sacrifice, the second wave brought something categorically different, more advanced, more relentless, and more capable of adaptation. After the second wave, the surface was no longer something humanity contested. It was something humanity abandoned. The final retreat underground was not a tactical decision. It was a concession. The Rust Belt as a concept seems to carry both a geographic and emotional meaning. Geographically, it's the scarred surface zone where raiders operate. Emotionally, it's the ruins of everything that was, preserved under ash and machine footprints. There are surface map locations that include references to pre-collapse industry, transit infrastructure, and religious or civic architecture. The detail in these environments is not random. It's a deliberate accumulation of implied history. The Dam Battlegrounds map was the location of a major clash during the first wave, referred to in the Codex as events around the Alcantara power plant. The fact that it's called the Dam Battlegrounds in the present tense means the community has kept the memory of that fight alive. The Keeping the Memory mission, in which Celeste asks you to recover the helmet of a raider who died at the first wave battle, is one of the most emotionally direct pieces of storytelling in the game. She doesn't explain the backstory in detail. She doesn't need to. The helmet says everything. Old world currency is explicitly stated to be worthless in the underground economy. This is not surprising, but the completeness of the cultural transition it implies is remarkable. People who were alive before the collapse had to psychologically let go of everything that once defined value. The kitbash economy replaced financial currency with material currency, specifically machine alloys and salvaged components. This means the Ark machines, which are trying to exterminate humanity, are also the primary economic resource of the surviving humans. The predator funds the resistance. Toledo is the broader underground city-state, of which Speranza is the oldest neighborhood. The name suggests a continuity with pre-collapse Italian city culture, though whether Toledo is a reclaimed name or a new one is not entirely clear from the lore available. One detail buried in community analysis suggests that Toledo's layout roughly corresponds to underground tunnel networks that predate the collapse. The survivors didn't just dig new tunnels, they repurposed transit infrastructure already in place and expanded from there. The fact that Speranza is described as an architectural miracle is not hyperbole in the lore. A city that hangs over an abyss created by sinkholes requires structural engineering that shouldn't have been possible under the conditions of the collapse. Someone extraordinary built it. Traders and vendors within Speranza each carry their own backstories and lore references. Shani, who manages surface operations and raider deployment, is described as a security expert. Her background implies either military training or experience from the early days of the first wave. The raider identity, as it exists in the game's present, is described as part cowboy, part scavenger, part adventurer. But the lore also notes they are jaded and resilient. These are not optimistic heroes. They're people who do a dangerous job because someone has to, and because it pays. Raiders don't think of themselves as soldiers, though the game notes they are highly valued by underground communities for combat capability. The distinction matters. Soldiers serve an institution. Raiders are more or less freelance survivors with a skill set. The earliest raiders were almost certainly not called raiders. That name would have evolved over time as the role became defined. What they were in the beginning was just people who went outside when others wouldn't. There are hints in the environmental storytelling of multiple extraction and descent points across the Rust Belt. This suggests the underground network is not just under a single city, it extends across a broader region with multiple communities potentially connected. The Stella Montis map, which was added as a major content update, is set in an abandoned research facility in the northern Snowy Mountains. The environmental storytelling there suggests pre-collapse research into survival scenarios and possible preservation of human knowledge or genetics. The implication of Stella Montis, one reading at least, is that some segment of pre-collapse civilization knew what was coming and tried to prepare, not to stop it, to survive it, which raises the question of whether the collapse itself was foreseeable. The spaceport map is described as a derelict launch facility full of forgotten technology from the pre-collapse world. Walking through it is essentially walking through the last chapter of one civilization and the first chapter of something much darker. The departure boards at the spaceport, visible in environmental details, show both departure and arrival listings. Arrivals, from where? That detail is small and easy to miss, but it points toward the Exodus as a two-way relationship with whatever is out there. The Blue Gate map, set higher in the mountains with both open areas and underground complexes, suggests the underground network extends vertically as well as horizontally. High-altitude survival and low-altitude survival present different challenges and different cultural expressions. The aesthetic of Ark Raiders has been described as post-apocalyptic, meaning the characters you encounter are not in the middle of the end of the world. They're living decades after it. The catastrophe is history to them, not news. That temporal distance shapes everything. The fact that the game is set in 2018, roughly 20 years after the Ark arrival as it's dated, means most living adults in Speranza have spent their entire conscious lives underground. The surface is not a memory for most of them. It's a story their elders tell. The cultural gap between those who remember the surface and those who were born underground is never explicitly addressed in the game, but it shadows everything. A child raised underground has a completely different relationship to the danger of going topside than someone who grew up seeing sunlight. The children of Speranza don't appear in gameplay. This is both a mechanical decision and, in a quiet way, a lore statement. The places raiders go are not places children are. The world of Ark Raiders draws a hard line between where life is sustained and where it is risked. The fact that Embark Studios has committed to a decade of story development for Ark Raiders means the lore we have now is deliberately incomplete. Every detail is a thread left hanging. Every answered question is paired with an unanswered one. That's not a flaw, it's the design. Chapter 2: The Ark Machines. Nobody knows where the Ark came from. The game says this clearly, and the lore supports it in every direction. The mystery is not a gap in the world building, it is the centre of it. The name Ark itself, as applied to the machines, is not explained etymologically in the game. Whether it's an acronym, a description, or a name assigned by survivors is left open. The Codex uses it consistently, but never defines its origin. Autonomous Robotic Collective is the fan interpretation, but the game doesn't confirm it. The machines are referred to in the game as ARC, with all capitals in official materials, but within the world of Speranza, characters speak of them as the Ark or just the machines, with a kind of flat familiarity. You don't capitalize the name of something that's been trying to kill you every day for 20 years. The first wave machines are visually and mechanically distinct from the second wave machines. Players can find first wave wreckage on the Dam Battlegrounds map. These older machines are described as less advanced, which means either they were an earlier model or they were a vanguard sent to test resistance. The idea that the first wave was a test is one of the more unsettling readings the lore supports. If you wanted to assess how humanity would respond to a mechanical invasion, you'd send a limited force, observe the response, and then design the second wave accordingly. The 20 to 30 year gap between waves fits that timeline. Apollo is the name of one of the notable Ark drone types, flying units that rely on thrusters to stay airborne. The name Apollo, an obvious reference to the space program, is either a coincidence in naming or a deliberate choice by whoever or whatever deployed these machines. The thruster vulnerability of Apollo drones is not subtle. It's something raiders discovered through combat experience and shared through the community. Targeting the thrusters became standard tactical knowledge, which means the Ark adapted to raiders, and the raiders adapted right back. The Ark machines drop loot when destroyed. This is mechanically convenient, but the lore implication is real. The machines carry materials that are compatible with human salvage and reverse engineering. Their components work with raider tech. That compatibility is deeply strange for something supposedly alien. The technology compatibility between Ark components and human salvage gear is one of the most frequently cited lore clues in community discussion. If the machines came from somewhere completely separate from human civilization, why does their hardware interface so cleanly with what's left of pre-collapse technology? One theory the lore points toward is that the Ark machines were designed by humans, specifically by the descendants of the Exodus. The Codex entry on the Exodus notes, those who left Earth had access to the most advanced technology of the era. 20 years later, machines arrived from space. The math is uncomfortable. The Exodus Codex entry is one of the most carefully worded pieces of lore in the game. It describes the off-world colonists as having impressive tech, and then, in what reads as a deliberate narrative adjacency, the first wave machines descend from space. The game doesn't say they're connected, it just places those facts next to each other. If the Exodus colonists or their descendants are sending the Ark machines back to Earth, the question becomes, why? Are they cleansing the planet for eventual recolonization? Are they punishing those left behind? Or is something else entirely happening out there in space that made the machines necessary? Another theory in the lore ecosystem is that the Ark are a rogue AI, created possibly before or during the collapse. They became self-aware and either caused the environmental catastrophe or took advantage of it. This theory doesn't quite fit the timeline as cleanly as the Exodus theory, but it's not incompatible with it. The third theory, extraterrestrial origin, is acknowledged in the lore but described in community analysis as less compelling. There is, the argument goes, something too human about the Ark machines. Their behaviour, their adaptability, their apparent goal-directedness all suggest a familiar intelligence somewhere in the chain. The Ark machines patrol the surface in patterns. Raiders have learned those patterns and use them to navigate topside. This behavioural predictability is not stupidity. It suggests the machines are executing a function, not simply hunting. They're maintaining something. What the Ark machines are maintaining on the surface is unclear. They patrol, they attack intruders, and they seem to converge on certain locations more than others. Whether they're guarding something, processing something, or simply preventing human re-establishment is a question the lore leaves deliberately unanswered. The machines come in multiple sizes and configurations. The smaller drone types like Apollo are mobile and agile. Larger ground units are slower but more heavily armoured. This variety in design suggests engineering intended for different tactical roles, which implies someone thought through those roles. The Ark machines don't speak, negotiate, or signal intent, they simply act. Raiders have observed no behaviour that suggests communication attempts with humans. Whether this is because the machines are incapable of it, not programmed for it, or simply not interested, is unknown. There are environmental details on various maps that suggest Ark machines interact with certain structures rather than destroying them. They pass around some ruins rather than through them. They cluster near specific sites. The behaviour implies they are not purely destructive, but selectively so. The wreckage of first wave machines scattered across the Dam Battlegrounds map is not just scenery. Raiders can scavenge those old hulks. The difference in component quality between a first wave machine and a current one is, in mechanical game terms, significant. But the architecture of the machine is recognisably consistent. This architectural consistency across generations of machines is another piece of evidence for a single designing intelligence. Random evolutionary adaptation wouldn't produce such coherent design language across decades. Something with a plan built these things. The machines appear to have no interest in the underground. They do not drill down into tunnels. They do not pursue raiders below extraction points. Whether this is a limitation of their design or a deliberate restraint is one of the great open questions of Ark Raiders lore. One reading of the machine's restraint from going underground is that they know the underground communities exist and simply don't consider them a threat worth pursuing. Another reading is that their mission is to control the surface, not eliminate all humans. Just keep them down. Raiders who spend enough time on the surface develop an intuitive read of machine behaviour patterns that is described in the lore as a kind of survival literacy. They can tell the difference between a patrol formation and an active search posture. This knowledge is hard-won and quietly passed between experienced raiders. The Ark machines have never been seen to transport materials in the way humans do. They process wreckage in situ. They don't build visible structures above ground. If they have a base of operations or a hub of some kind, it has not been discovered in the Rust Belt. The possibility that the Ark machines have a base of operations beyond the known map areas is one of the most tantalizing lore threads the game leaves open. Stella Montis suggests humanity was trying to study or prepare for something from a high-altitude vantage point, perhaps looking toward whatever was coming. Some community analysis has noted that certain Ark machines appear newer than others in the sense that their components are less degraded and their behavioural responses are faster. If machines are still arriving from somewhere, there's a source, and that source is still operational. The question of whether new machines are being manufactured and sent to Earth, or whether they are self-replicating using surface materials, is unresolved in the lore. Both possibilities are disturbing in different ways. One implies an off-world factory. The other implies the Rust Belt is being consumed to make more machines. The Ark never retreat. Raiders have never successfully driven a machine force back in the way that the Battle of Victory Ridge narrative describes at least not in the 20-year period the current game covers. The machines push until they are destroyed, or until they have accomplished whatever they were doing. The specific trigger for Ark machine aggression toward raiders is combat or proximity. They don't pursue into underground spaces. They will pursue across significant stretches of the surface. The pursuit behavior suggests a territorial programming rather than a hunt to exterminate one. There is one Ark behavior that community players and lore readers consistently flag as particularly strange. Occasionally, machines will stop mid-patrol at certain locations and remain stationary for extended periods before resuming. What they're doing during these pauses has never been explained. Whether those pauses represent a data transmission, a structural assessment, a charging cycle, or something else entirely is part of the ongoing mystery of the Ark. In-world, raiders who witness it usually get out of the area rather than stick around to observe. Smart decision. The Ark machines have no names in Speranza's casual vocabulary beyond the designations raiders have assigned them. Those designations are functional, describing shape, size, and threat level rather than any qualities the machines themselves have expressed. The aesthetic of the Ark machines in the game has been described as brutalist and industrial rather than sleek. They do not look like consumer technology. They look like industrial equipment repurposed for violence, which is either a design philosophy or a clue about their actual origin. The way Ark machines respond to damage is noted in the game. Some components fail before others. Thrusters, as with Apollo, are a reliable weak point. Armor panels can be stripped. The machines adapt their behavior when damaged, moving differently or prioritizing certain targets. This adaptive response is not typical of simple automated systems. The fact that Ark machines drop loot that raiders immediately put back into use is described by some community members as the game's central ironic loop. The machines trying to wipe out humanity are also the primary source of the materials keeping humanity alive. The hunter feeds the hunted. Raiders who specialize in taking down Ark machines are described in the lore as highly valued. This is notable because it creates a class of warriors within a community of scavengers. Not everyone has to fight, not everyone chooses to, but those who do become essential. There is no evidence in the lore of any Ark machine ever exhibiting curiosity, hesitation, or anything that could be read as emotion. They are purposeful and relentless. This absence of any recognizable inner life makes them uniquely terrifying, because you cannot negotiate with something that has no interest in the outcome. The relationship between the Ark and the Exodus colonists remains the game's biggest unresolved question as of the lore available. Embark Studios has confirmed the story will develop over the coming decade. Whatever that answer is, it is clearly the spine of the entire narrative. The most chilling possible reading of the Ark's purpose is simply land clearance. If the Exodus descendants intend to return to Earth someday, they need the surface cleared of the billions who remained. The machines are not invaders, they are renovators, preparing the planet for new occupants. If that theory is correct, then the raiders of Speranza are not fighting a war they can win by destroying machines. They are fighting a war whose real enemy is hundreds of light years away, with resources and technology that dwarfs anything the underground has. The machines are just the arm extended from that distance. That reading makes every surface run a kind of defiance, not against the machines specifically, but against a decision made by people who left and decided that the ones who stayed didn't matter. Raiders going topside every day are, in a quiet way, saying, "We're still here." Chapter 3. Speranza and the Underground. Speranza is the oldest neighborhood of Toledo, but to most people in the game, Speranza is just home. It is the anchor of the experience, the place you return to, and in lore terms, the miracle that shouldn't have survived, but somehow keeps surviving. The name Speranza is the Italian word for hope. This is not a coincidence in a game where the lore is deeply rooted in southern Italian geography and culture. Someone named this place deliberately, and that deliberateness tells you something about who they were. The fact that Speranza was built into a sinkhole, a void created by the catastrophe that ended the surface world, is one of the most poetic pieces of environmental architecture in the game. The disaster that destroyed one world created the foundation for another. Speranza literally dangles over an abyss. The structural engineering required to make that safe, even by post-collapse standards, is extraordinary. Every section of the city is either anchored into the sinkhole walls or suspended from them. The whole community lives on borrowed stability. Celeste is both the founder of Speranza and its ongoing technical heart. The lore describes her as the engineering genius, whose knowledge made the city possible. She is also described as a first-wave survivor, meaning she has personal experience of the worst the Ark has done. The emotional weight of Celeste's character in the lore is significant. She built something that works in a world where almost nothing works anymore. She did it after seeing the machines at their most devastating, and she keeps it running. That's not optimism. That's stubbornness, so profound it looks like hope. Shani is the operational backbone of Speranza's surface program. She runs security, coordinates raider deployment, and manages the intelligence about safe extraction routes. Her expertise is described as security-focused, which in pre-collapse terms might mean anything from corporate security to military service. The dynamic between Celeste and Shani in the lore suggests a division of labour that has deep roots. Celeste keeps the place alive structurally. Shani keeps the people alive tactically. Two different kinds of survival intelligence, both necessary. The vendors and traders of Speranza each carry their own narrative weight. They're not just merchants mechanically. They're custodians of specific kinds of knowledge: technical, medical, martial, and mercantile. Each one represents a different strand of pre-collapse expertise, still functioning. The kitbash economy, in which machine alloys and salvaged components serve as the primary currency, has implications beyond just trade. It means the most dangerous thing you can do, going to the surface to fight and scavenge machines, is also the most economically rational thing you can do. Risk is the currency. The old world currency being worthless is mentioned specifically in the lore of Speranza. But it's worth sitting with what that means practically. Paper money, digital accounts, precious metals, none of it translates. The entire conceptual infrastructure of wealth dissolved. And people built something new in its place. What people built in place of traditional currency is a system where your labour has direct, immediate material value. You go out, you come back with something. That something feeds, heals, or arms the community. There's no abstraction. The feedback loop from work to survival is short and clear. That directness of the kitbash economy shapes the psychology of raiders. They're not accumulating abstract wealth for future security. They're constantly converting risk into materials that immediately matter. It produces a specific kind of person, present, tense, practical, and good at calculating what a situation is worth. The social structure of Speranza, as implied by the lore, is not entirely egalitarian. Raiders who are particularly skilled at fighting Ark machines are described as highly valued. Celeste and Shani hold clear positions of authority. The traders have economic leverage. There is hierarchy, but it's competence-based. The phrase from the Speranza proverb, "We don't live in the dark because we're afraid," is a community statement, but also a psychological one. It's people telling themselves and each other that the underground life is chosen rather than forced. Whether everyone believes that is another question. The relationship between non-raider civilians in Speranza and raiders themselves is implied to carry tension. Civilians and traders rely on raiders. Raiders know they are relied upon. That dependency doesn't automatically translate to respect. In some cases, it translates to resentment on both sides. The community missions in the game, like keeping the memory, suggest that Speranza's leadership actively cultivates shared history and ritual. The request to recover a dead raider's helmet is not just personal for Celeste, it's a civic act, a community reminding itself of what the cost of survival looks like. The memorial that Celeste asks you to visit in Formicae Hills is located in the Dam Battlegrounds area, meaning you have to go through active Ark territory to pay respects to the dead. That is a specific kind of world where honouring the fallen requires risking joining them. The underground city is described as having workshops, which is important. Workshops imply tools, raw materials, and ongoing production. Speranza is not just a shelter. It is a manufacturing node, however small, taking salvage and turning it into something functional. The aesthetic of the underground community, as described across various lore sources, is kitbash in the literal sense. Things are held together with parts that were never designed to work together. Improvised, functional, and carrying visible evidence of what they were before they became what they are. That visibility of previous use is culturally significant. In Speranza, you can see what the city used to be because the city was built from it. The infrastructure of pre-collapse transit networks is still recognizable inside the underground settlement. History is embedded in the walls. The concept of extraction points on the surface. The elevators, metro stations, and air shafts that raiders use to return underground implies that the underground network and the surface world are connected by specific choke points. Those choke points are both tactical and cultural. They're the thresholds between survival and risk. Raider hatches are described as safer extraction points that require keys to open. The existence of locked extraction points implies access control, which implies the community has thought through who gets to use which exit. Security and exclusivity, even in the apocalypse. The 30-minute time limit that raiders have on the surface before they must extract is mentioned in gameplay mechanics. But within the lore, it implies environmental factors. Whether it's radiation, Ark patrol timing, or some other hazard that enforces that window, the surface is not somewhere you linger. The idea that time itself is a resource on the surface, that every minute above ground is spent, adds a specific psychological texture to the raider experience. You're always counting. You're always calculating. The decision to push further or head back is never abstract. It's immediate. The social culture of returning raiders, what they bring back and the stories they tell, would in any community become a central form of social bonding. The lore doesn't detail this explicitly, but it's implied. The evening in Speranza after a day of surface runs is a social event. Stories get told, debts get settled, plans get made. The hostile raiders that appear in the game as AI-controlled enemies represent a faction that is separated from Speranza's community norms. Shani warns about groups taking over settlements on the surface. These are humans who chose a different relationship to the underground community, one defined by predation rather than participation. The existence of hostile raiders as a narrative element opens questions about what drives people to that choice. Resource scarcity, ideological difference, personal history with Speranza's leadership. The game implies this split without explaining its origins fully. The possibility that other underground communities exist beyond Toledo and Speranza is raised by several environmental and lore details. The underground network extends across a broad region. Not everyone underground is in Speranza. Where are the others, and how are they different? Toledo as a city-state implies governance beyond just community leadership. A state implies laws, territorial claims, relations with other states. The scale of Toledo's implied political structure is something the lore hints at, but doesn't yet map fully. The fact that Speranza is described as Toledo's oldest neighborhood implies that Toledo grew after Speranza was established. Other neighborhoods would have different founding stories, different cultures, and different relationships to the surface. Speranza is the original. It's not the only. The architecture of survival in Speranza, tunnels repurposed from pre-collapse transit networks, the city hanging over voids, workshops carved into former civic spaces, is both practically impressive and visually distinctive. The game uses Unreal Engine 5 to render this, and the design team leaned into the Italian environmental heritage. The remnants of Italy's architectural and civic history show up in the map environments in ways that are not always obvious. There are forms and proportions in the ruins that predate the collapse by centuries. The machines destroyed the 20th century. The 15th century, in some places, survived. Chapter 4. The Raiders. A raider is not just someone who goes to the surface. The identity carries weight in Speranza that is hard to translate. It's something between profession and caste, between bravery and addiction to risk, between community service and personal recklessness. The description of raiders as post-apocalyptic cowboys is an official one from the game's own lore materials. Cowboys were not universally heroic figures. They were workers in a dangerous and often brutal industry who developed a specific code of conduct because survival depended on it. Raiders are similar. The jaded quality attributed to raiders in the lore is consistent with what we know about people who operate in extreme risk environments over long periods. You don't stay wide-eyed and idealistic when the consequences of a bad decision are immediate and fatal. You become efficient and unsentimental. The resilience attributed to raiders is the other side of that jaded quality. They keep going. Every run that ends in extraction rather than death is a confirmation that the risk is manageable, that skill and judgment and a little luck can bring you home. That belief has to be maintained against constant evidence to the contrary. The law notes that raiders have their own agendas separate from community service. They scavenge for the community, yes, but they also look for opportunities for personal advantage. This tension between individual gain and collective survival is built into the role. It creates a character who is never purely heroic. The equipment that raiders use is described as repurposed and kit-bashed, but effective. Weapons are assembled from salvage. Gear is improvised. The aesthetic of a raider's loadout reflects the same principle as Speranza itself. Function from fragments. The fact that raiders can craft weapons and items from ARC components means the machines are constantly providing the community with raw material to fight them. There's a grim efficiency to that loop. The harder the machines push, the more components they leave behind, the better armed the raiders become. Character customization in ARC Raiders allows players to shape both identity and playstyle. Within the lore, this reflects the reality that raiders are not a uniform category. They are individuals who happen to share a profession and a home. Their differences in approach are as important as their shared skills. The lore mention of raiders looking for adventures is interesting because it introduces an element beyond pure survival motivation. Some raiders go topside because they have to. Some go because they want to. The world above, deadly as it is, has a pull for a certain kind of person. That pull toward the surface, despite its danger, suggests a psychological dimension to the raider identity. The underground is safe but confined. The surface is lethal but open. For someone with a certain temperament, that trade-off is not as clear as survival logic would suggest. The extraction loop of the game, going out and coming back, is described by critics and designers as a metaphor for the human struggle between security and ambition. Every run is a negotiation between how much you can take from the world and how much you're willing to risk to take it. New raiders, presumably, exist. Someone has to be doing this job for the first time. The process by which new raiders are trained, tested, and integrated into the community is not detailed in the lore, but it would be one of the most important cultural functions in Speranza. How you make new raiders shapes what kind of raiders you have. The relationship between raiders and civilians in the underground is one of mutual dependence that doesn't automatically produce warmth. A doctor depends on raiders to bring medical supplies. A raider depends on the doctor to stay alive. Neither chose this arrangement, both are stuck with it. The social status of raiders within Speranza is implied to be high, particularly for those who specialize in bringing down arc machines. But social status and personal happiness are not the same thing. The law doesn't claim raiders are content with their role. It just claims they fill it. There are hints across the lore of raiders who didn't come back. The mission to recover a fallen raider's helmet is the most explicit of these. But the cumulative effect of all the surface runs, all the extraction windows and machine encounters, must produce a steady stream of losses that the community absorbs quietly. How Speranza mourns its dead is not detailed explicitly in the lore. But the existence of a mission built around recovering a memorial relic suggests that the community does memorialize. It doesn't just move on. The dead are named. The losses are kept. The lore detail that raiders bring back stories as well as materials is implied rather than stated, but it's a reasonable inference from any similar historical context. The people who go outside and come back are the ones who know what's out there. Their stories are the community's intelligence. That informational role of raiders as the eyes and ears of the underground on the surface world gives them leverage beyond just material value. They know things. They've seen things. That knowledge is a form of power in a world where information about the surface is survival critical. The possibility of rogue raiders, players or characters who turn against the Speranza community is raised by the hostile raider AI enemies. The existence of a faction that defected or was expelled or simply chose a different path suggests the raider community is not monolithic. There are people who burned their bridges to the underground. What a rogue raider's daily life looks like is an interesting question. Without the support infrastructure of Speranza, the workshops and traders and medical resources, survival on an ongoing basis would be genuinely harder. Rogues either have their own support network or they accept a harder life in exchange for whatever they're getting. The implication that rogue raiders are taking over certain settlements on the Rust Belt surface suggests they're building something, not just surviving, but establishing. Whether that something is a rival community or an empire built on predation of other raiders is part of the ongoing lore development. Raiders who operate in teams are noted to have tactical and social advantages over solo operators. The community dimension of teaming up mirrors the broader community logic of Speranza itself. Collective survival is more reliable than individual survival, but individuals sometimes choose the harder path anyway. The gear system in the game means that dying on the surface has real consequences. You lose what you were carrying. This mechanical truth has lore implications. A raider who loses their kit to the machines or to a rival player hasn't just lost equipment, they've lost the labour it took to build or find that gear, and they have to start again. The resilience required to start again after a total loss on the surface is the psychological core of what it means to be a raider. You built something, you lost it, you go back out. That cycle, repeated across a lifetime, produces someone who holds material things lightly and personal capability very tightly. Chapter 5. The Mysteries and the Future. The lore of Ark Raiders is structured around absence as much as presence. What we don't know matters as much as what we do. The game's world is built on the gap between what happened and what we can confirm, and in that gap, the most interesting questions live. The origin of the Ark machines is the biggest absence. 20 years into the invasion, the underground communities have no confirmed answer for where the machines came from. They have theories, raiders gather intelligence, but the source remains undiscovered. The codex system is how Ark Raiders delivers its lore to players who look for it. These are collected entries, notes, fragments of recovered documents, and records that fill in the world's history without presenting it as a continuous narrative. The fragmentation is intentional. It mirrors how survivors would actually have access to information. The environmental storytelling of Ark Raiders is noted repeatedly in reviews and community analysis as one of the game's genuine strengths. The game tells stories through placement of objects, the condition of ruins, the details of what's preserved and what's destroyed. You read the world to understand it. The Dam Battlegrounds map, as the oldest and most story-laden location in the game, rewards extremely close attention. The scraps of first wave machines, the fortifications that raiders built and lost, the geography of a battle that happened before the current game's present. All of it is still there. The Stella Montis research facility raises questions that the map itself doesn't answer. What was being researched? What was being preserved? The environmental detail suggests a project of significant scale, which means significant funding, which means institutional backing from a pre-collapse government or organisation. If Stella Montis was a government-backed preservation project, and if that government was aware of what was coming, then the collapse and the Ark invasion may have been anticipated by more people in power than the law currently reveals. Anticipation changes culpability. The community-driven unlocking of Stella Montis in the game's live service structure, where players collectively contributed resources to access the new zone, was itself a piece of lore expression. The community in the game achieved something, and the player community outside it achieved something together. The layers collapsed. Embark Studios has stated in interviews that new factions, locations, and story arcs are planned for the coming decade. This positions Ark Raiders not as a game with a fixed story, but as a living narrative infrastructure. The lore is not finished because the game is not finished. The question of what the Exodus colonists are doing right now, in the game's present of 2180, is the most forward-looking mystery in the lore. Are they thriving out there? Are they struggling? Did their society survive the generations? And do they know or care what is happening to the people they left behind? The possibility that the Exodus descendants are entirely unaware of the Ark invasion on Earth, that the machines operate independently of any human direction, is one reading. Maybe whatever was created has long since escaped any control. Maybe there's no one sending commands from space. Maybe it's been autonomous since the beginning. That reading, that the machines are a runaway system with no ongoing human architect, is actually more terrifying in some ways than the deliberate genocide theory. A system with someone behind it can be negotiated with, in theory. A system that is simply executing a program it has been running for decades, has no off switch that raiders can reach. The surface behaviours of the Ark that don't add up to simple extermination are the evidence most people cite for the autonomous system theory. The machines don't press their advantage underground. They don't pursue total elimination. They behave more like custodians than killers, custodians of something. What the machines are maintaining on the surface is a question that the game's expanding map regions may eventually answer. As Embark Studios adds new locations, each one is an opportunity to reveal what the Ark are actually doing when they're not shooting at raiders. The fact that the game's designers explicitly describe the PvPvE extraction loop as a narrative expression of humanity's struggle for survival suggests they are thinking about the story and the gameplay as one thing. Every mechanical decision is a lore statement. Every lore detail is a potential mechanical implication. The presence of other human players as potential enemies in the Rust Belt is given lore justification through the scarcity of resources and the competition for survival. People who share a community on the surface of a lore document are enemies on the surface of a map because survival makes people that way. The tension between cooperation and competition in Ark Raiders is one of the most human elements of its design. The machines are the external threat, but raiders are the internal threat. The game never lets you forget that survival doesn't automatically make people good to each other. The safe pocket mechanic, the protected inventory space that players retain even if they die, is small but lore significant. It suggests that there are things worth protecting at a level beyond ordinary risk calculation. Not everything you value can be risked. Some things you keep no matter what. The quests given by Speranza's vendors are framed as personal requests, but serve a community function. Each quest that sends a raider to a specific surface location with a specific goal adds to the collective knowledge base about the Rust Belt. The vendors are running an intelligence operation through commerce. The lore clue about Ark technology being somewhat compatible with human salvage and therefore potentially reverse engineerable implies that raiders are always in a slow technological arms race with the machines. If you can understand their components, you can eventually counter their capabilities. Knowledge is the weapon that persists after everything else is lost. The possibility that raiders are getting better at fighting the Ark over time, that each generation of raider is more effective than the last because of accumulated knowledge, is an optimistic reading that the lore supports without confirming. Progress is slow. The machines don't stop, but the line hasn't moved backward. The question of whether Speranza and the other underground communities can ever retake the surface is never seriously addressed in the current lore as a near-term prospect. The surface is not being contested in the present. It's being raided. The scale of what reclaiming the surface would require is so far beyond current capacity that the community apparently doesn't think about it operationally. The long game of Ark Raiders lore, the decade that Embark Studios is promising, may eventually build to exactly that question. At what point does the balance shift? At what point do the raiders become something more than scavengers? At what point does Speranza stop surviving and start winning? That shift, from endurance to agency, from survival to reclamation, is the arc of the story underneath all the individual facts and mysteries. Humanity went underground. Humanity adapted. Humanity learned to fight. The question is whether humanity can go back. The last fact in this collection is not a fact at all. It's a reading. The world of Ark Raiders, for all its machine enemies and collapsed civilizations and underground cities hanging over voids, is fundamentally a story about what people do when everything is taken from them and they still have to live. They name the darkness. They build in it. They send their bravest people into the light and wait for them to come back. And when they don't come back, they send more. Chapter 6. The Rust Belt Up Close. The Rust Belt is the name the underground communities gave to the surface world, and like most names people give to things that scare them, it says more about the namers than the thing named. Rust implies decay. A belt implies something that wraps around something else. Together the phrase suggests a world that is rotting in a ring around the life still left underground. The geographic scope of the Rust Belt, as implied by the maps, is limited to the regions that raiders can practically reach and return from within a surface window. But the Rust Belt as a concept is probably much larger. The ruins of civilization don't stop at the edge of any playable map. The Dam Battlegrounds is the earliest and most historically loaded map in Ark Raiders. The Alcantara power plant at its core was a functioning piece of critical infrastructure before the collapse. Power plants don't just stop being significant when the civilization they powered collapses. They become something else, ruins, fortifications, or symbols. The fact that raiders call this area the Dam Battlegrounds, rather than referring to it by its pre-collapse name, suggests a deliberate cultural rebranding. This is not the power plant anymore. This is where a battle happened. The utility of the structure has been replaced in community memory by its military significance. Scrapyards on the Dam Battlegrounds map are functional locations for raiders, as well as environmental storytelling spaces. The machinery that ended up in those scrapyards during the first wave battles tells you something about the scale of that conflict. These weren't skirmishes. The amount of broken equipment suggests sustained large-scale fighting. The Formicae Hills area within the Dam Battlegrounds map is where Celeste's memorial is located, the destination of the Keeping the Memory mission. Formicae is the Italian word for ant mounds or ant hills. That name, whether pre-existing or assigned after the collapse, suggests a landscape that was already characterized by earth formations before the sinkholes and machines made it something else. The surface environments in Ark Raiders are not simply post-apocalyptic rubble fields. There is a visual and structural specificity to the ruins that reflects the actual geography and architectural heritage of the Campania region of southern Italy. The game is set in a real place that has been destroyed by an imagined catastrophe. That specificity of real-world geography matters because it gives the environmental storytelling an anchor. When you walk through ruins in the Dam Battlegrounds and recognize the proportions of structures, the material choices, the relationship of buildings to terrain, you're reading Italian regional architecture through the lens of destruction. The place remembers what it was. The spaceport map is the clearest window onto the pre-collapse civilization's ambitions. A launch facility of that scale in that location represents enormous investment and institutional commitment. It was not built for a single mission. It was built as the beginning of something. The Exodus used it as an ending. The departure boards at the spaceport mentioned earlier are one of those details that rewards looking at closely. Departure listings make sense. A launch facility would track outgoing flights, but arrival listings suggest this was not a one-way door. At some point, someone expected to come back, or something was expected to arrive, or both. The state of the spaceport in the game's present is described as derelict, but derelict doesn't mean empty. The machines patrol it. That patrolling suggests the Ark considers the spaceport significant enough to maintain a presence there, 20 years after the last human shuttle left from it. Why the Ark would care about a defunct launch facility is a question worth sitting with. If the machines are maintaining the surface for eventual reuse by the Exodus descendants, a spaceport would be a priority installation to preserve. You can't receive returning ships at a collapsed facility. The Blue Gate map introduces different terrain, higher altitude, more open areas, and underground complexes that exist at elevation rather than below sea level. This suggests the human underground network wasn't just built down into lowland sinkholes, it extended into mountain tunnel systems as well. Mountain tunnel systems in the Campania-adjacent regions of Italy have historical precedent. Civil engineering projects, wartime bunkers, and natural cave networks all create subterranean infrastructure at various altitudes. The Ark Raiders world builds on that real-world infrastructure logic and extends it to post-collapse survival. The Stella Montis facility in the northern mountain snow zone is the most isolated and most mysterious location in the current game. The snow and altitude create a sensory environment completely different from the arid or industrial tones of the other maps. Isolation was clearly part of the design, whether that design was pre-collapse or not. Research facilities in isolated locations are a recognizable template, not just in science fiction but in actual institutional history. You put sensitive research somewhere remote when you want to limit access, reduce risk of contamination, or protect the work from external disruption. Stella Montis fits that template precisely. The environmental storytelling of Stella Montis suggests preparation rather than reaction. Someone built that facility not in response to the collapse, but in anticipation of something. The scale and apparent purpose of the site implies long-led planning. Someone knew something was coming well before it arrived. If Stella Montis was built to preserve humanity in the face of anticipated catastrophe, it raises the question of what kind of preservation was intended. Genetic archives, knowledge repositories, Human populations in stasis. The law doesn't specify, but the options each carry different implications for what might still be there. The Community Unlock event for Stella Montis, in which players collectively contributed resources to open the new zone, was one of the most discussed moments in Ark Raider's post-launch life. It turned a gameplay mechanic, resource contribution, into a shared narrative event. The underground community worked together to open a door. The player base worked together to open the same door. The metaphor was precise. Surface weather and environmental conditions are implied by the map aesthetics to vary significantly across the Rust Belt. The dam battlegrounds run dry and industrial. The mountain zones run cold and isolated. The spaceport reads as windswept and abandoned in a specifically open sky way. These aren't just aesthetic choices. They imply an ecosystem that, while damaged, is not dead. The Ark machines operate in all weather and all terrain. They don't appear to be slowed by snow or impeded by flooding. This operational consistency across environments suggests engineering designed for global deployment, not regional use. Whatever was designed to send them here, planned for the full range of Earth's conditions. The Rust Belt has what raiders call extraction points, and the variety of those points across maps reveals something about the underground network. Metro stations imply urban infrastructure. Air shafts imply industrial or military facilities. Elevators imply purpose-built raider infrastructure added after the collapse. The network is layered across different historical periods. The raider hatches that require keys for safer extraction represent a specifically post-collapse innovation. Someone after the collapse built those hatches, installed the locks, and distributed the keys. That's a logistical and security operation that required planning, which means Speranza, or some predecessor community, was functional enough to run that kind of operation early in its history. The 30-minute surface window, available to raiders before they must extract, is one of the game's mechanical facts that bleeds most directly into its emotional texture. Every minute on the surface is a countdown. You're always aware of the clock. That awareness shapes every decision, every risk calculation, every split-second call to push forward or pull back. The things that make the surface dangerous beyond the machines include, by implication from the law, air quality issues, residual environmental hazards from the collapse, and the general structural instability of ruins that have been damaged by earthquakes, flooding, and years of machine activity. The machines are the most dramatic threat. They're not the only one. The materials raiders most value from the surface are machine alloys, components from Ark technology that are both durable and versatile. But ordinary salvage also has value. Medical supplies, tools, food sources, electronic components, and pre-collapse technology of any kind are all worth bringing back. The surface is a warehouse that nobody owns and everyone needs. The competition among raiders for the best salvage on any given surface run is the source of player versus player conflict in the game. Two groups of humans can be perfectly aligned in their desire to survive and still be enemies the moment they're competing for the same resource pile. That's not a game design choice. That's a human reality. The law implies that the surface over the 20 years since the second Ark wave has become progressively more scavenged in certain areas and progressively more dangerous in others. Raiders who've been at this for a long time know where the good salvage used to be. Finding new good salvage requires going further or taking bigger risks. The territorial behaviour of Ark machines means certain surface zones are simply not viable for raider operation at certain times. The machines cluster, disperse, and reposition. Raiders who understand those patterns can exploit the windows between machine concentrations. Those windows are the professional edge that experienced raiders have over new ones. Environmental storytelling in the Rust Belt includes details that suggest life other than machines and raiders. Plant growth in ruins, animal signs, evidence of water sources. The surface is not biologically dead, even if it's humanly unlivable. Something is still growing in the cracks of the world the Ark controls. The presence of any ecological recovery, however limited, on the surface is the kind of detail that raiders would notice and that Speranza's leadership would want to know about. If the surface is slowly becoming more hospitable, even without human presence, the timeline for potential re-emergence changes. Not soon, but maybe someday. The ruins of Toledo Piazza, the pre-collapse surface city that became the namesake of the underground city-state, appear in environmental details across the maps. What was once a civic and cultural centre of surface life now exists in fragments, recognizable in form, but stripped of function. Toledo above ground is an echo. Toledo below ground is the reality. The naming of the underground city after a surface location suggests the founding community's relationship to its origins. They didn't name it something new. They carried the name underground with them. Speranza is hope. Toledo is home, even if home is now somewhere else entirely. The Rust Belt's geography implies that raiders routinely cross terrain that was, before the collapse, either privately owned, publicly managed, or both. Property ownership as a concept is legally and practically meaningless on the surface now. The land belongs to whoever can hold it long enough to take what they need from it. That abolition of surface property rights is total and enforced entirely by physics and machine activity. There are no legal frameworks for the surface. There are only capabilities. What you can carry, what you can fight, how fast you can move. The Rust Belt has reduced land tenure to pure practicality. The cultural implication of growing up with that understanding of the surface is that young raiders in Speranza have a completely different relationship to the concept of ownership than any pre-collapse human did. Ownership is what you can defend. Nothing more, nothing less. That philosophy bleeds into Speranza's internal culture as well. The kitbash economy is ownership by function. You have what you can use. You trade what you can't. You don't accumulate what you can't protect, because in a city hanging over a void, excess weight is a structural problem as much as a social one. The routes that raiders use to reach different surface areas from the underground are not randomly distributed. They cluster around specific descent and ascent points that the community has mapped and maintains. Those routes are proprietary knowledge in a real sense. Raiders who know safe routes have an advantage that they don't always share freely. The sharing or withholding of route intelligence within the raider community is one of the subtler social dynamics the law implies. Good route information saves lives. It also has market value. The decision about whether to give it freely or trade it is an ongoing negotiation within Speranza's social fabric. The environmental hazards of specific map zones, whether from arc concentration, structural collapse risk, or legacy collapse damage, are part of the institutional knowledge that experienced raiders carry and newer raiders have to learn. Some of that knowledge is formal, passed through Speranza's operational briefings from Shani. Some of it is informal, traded between raiders in the downtime between runs. The stories that raiders tell about the surface, the close calls and the strange finds, and the behaviour of machines they've never seen documented before, constitute a living oral archive of the Rust Belt. That archive supplements the Codex. In some respects, it predates it. Before anyone wrote anything down, raiders were telling each other what they'd seen. Chapter 7. Technology, Weapons, and the kit bash aesthetic. The weapons that raiders carry are not factory products. They are assembled things, combinations of components from different sources, eras, and original purposes, held together by expertise and necessity. Understanding that changes how you see every weapon in the game. The kit bash aesthetic of raider equipment is not just visual style, it's a technical philosophy. In a world where you can't order replacement parts because there are no factories making them, the skill of combining available components into functional tools becomes the most important engineering discipline there is. The word kit bash comes from the hobby of combining parts from different model kits to build something new. In Ark Raiders, it describes an entire civilization's approach to material culture. Every functional object in Speranza is, in some sense, a kit bash, a thing made from other things that used to be something else. Ark machine alloys are described as unusually durable and versatile. This material quality is part of why raiders prioritize harvesting them from destroyed machines. You're not just collecting scrap, you're collecting the best engineering material available in the known world from an enemy that apparently has access to manufacturing capabilities far beyond anything the underground has. The reverse engineering of Ark technology by raiders and Speranza's technical community is implied to be ongoing and productive. If Ark components are compatible enough with human salvage to be integrated into raider gear, then the study of those components over 2 decades has presumably produced significant understanding of Ark manufacturing principles. That accumulated understanding is a form of technological transfer. The machines are unwillingly teaching the community that's fighting them. Every Ark unit destroyed and stripped contributes to a growing body of knowledge about how the enemy thinks and builds. That knowledge has military and industrial applications. The weapons crafting system in Ark Raiders mechanically represents this reverse engineering culture. Players combine components to create weapons with specific characteristics. The variety of combinations reflects the variety of salvage available and the creativity required to make functional tools from mismatched parts. Speranza's workshops are the physical heart of this culture. Workshops required tools, and those tools themselves had to be built or salvaged from pre-collapse sources. The workshop represents layers of accumulated technical capacity. Each generation of workshop users inherits the tools built by the previous generation and adds to them. Medical technology in Speranza is presumably also a kit bash operation. Without pharmaceutical supply chains, medicine in the underground relies on salvaged supplies, improvised alternatives, and the knowledge of whoever among the survivors had medical training before the collapse. Pre-collapse medical infrastructure in southern Italy was substantial. Some of that knowledge survived. The raider perk and skill system in the game implies a formal or semi-formal structure for developing and recognizing capability. When you upgrade character perks, you are, within the lore, developing a more refined version of the skills that keep you alive on the surface. Those skills are not innate. They're learned, practiced, and earned. The specialization options available to players suggest that the raider community values different skill sets for different conditions. Combat specialists, scout types, support-focused builds. In lore terms, these reflect the reality that surface operations require different things from different people, and a community of raiders is stronger when those skills are distributed. The safe pocket mechanic, the small inventory space that persists through death, is a mechanical convenience that has a lore justification worth thinking about. In practice, raiders probably carry certain items in specifically secured internal locations. Medical essentials, personal identification, the things you absolutely cannot afford to lose. Pre-collapse technology that appears on the surface and in salvage is categorized in the game's lore as old world tech. Its value depends on both condition and recognizability. A piece of technology that nobody alive can understand how to use is worth less than one that someone in Speranza's workshops can figure out within a reasonable time. The Exodus humans took the most advanced technology with them when they left. This is stated in the lore directly. What that means for the people underground is that the ceiling of available technology was set by what was left behind, which was specifically the second-tier stuff. The good technology went to space. The gap between what the underground has and what the Exodus presumably has is therefore not just generational. It's a deliberate outcome of the Exodus selection process. The people who left took the tools that would make them most capable. The people who stayed were left with what wouldn't fit or wasn't considered essential. 20 years of Arc machine components supplementing that left-behind technology has partially closed the gap in certain areas. Raiders with access to Arc alloys and reverse-engineered Arc components are working with better raw materials than pre-collapse surface salvage alone would provide. The machines are, in this specific sense, funding the community's technological development. The crafting economy within Speranza involves selling salvage to vendors, buying components, crafting weapons and gear, and then taking that gear back to the surface to get more salvage. This circular flow means the community's technological capacity is directly coupled to its raider operational tempo. More runs equal more materials equal better gear equal more effective runs. The balance point of that loop is casualties. Lose raiders faster than you can train new ones, and the loop breaks. Lose too much gear to failed runs, and the material cycle stalls. The sustainability of Speranza's operational model depends on keeping losses below a threshold that the community can absorb and replace. The gear quality differential between experienced raiders and new ones is not just a mechanical progression element, it's a law reality. An experienced raider with well-crafted equipment is substantially more survivable on the surface than someone with basic salvage gear. Experience and material quality compound each other. The weapons available in Arc Raiders are described as varied in style and function, reflecting the diverse salvage sources that went into making them. Some weapons clearly descend from pre-collapse military or civilian designs. Others appear to incorporate Arc components in ways that change their fundamental operating principle. A weapon that incorporates Arc components into its design is not just a kit bash, it's a philosophical statement. You took the thing trying to kill you, learned how it works, and turned it into something that helps you kill it back. That's a loop of resistance that has something almost satisfying about it. The Unreal Engine 5 rendering of the game's environments and equipment is frequently cited in reviews for its visual fidelity. The surface materials, weathering, and structural damage visible on equipment and architecture reflect actual physical processes. Rust, erosion, impact damage, and repair attempts are all readable on the surfaces of things in the Rust Belt. The visual language of the equipment in Arc Raiders communicates history without exposition. You can look at a Raider's gear and read decisions in it. This panel came from a machine. That grip was wrapped after the original cracked. This scope was added by someone who needed range. The object tells you about the person who made it. The infrastructure of Speranza itself is a kind of technology. The engineering required to maintain a city inside a sinkhole includes active monitoring of structural stress, ongoing reinforcement, water management, air circulation, and power generation. All of that requires technical systems that someone has to maintain. Power generation in Speranza is one of the most practically important and least discussed aspects of the law. The city needs power for lighting, workshops, medical equipment, communication systems, and probably environmental controls. Where that power comes from, pre-collapse solar or hydro infrastructure, salvaged generators, arc power cells, is not specified but matters enormously. Arc power cells, if the machines use something analogous to a power source that raiders can harvest, would be an obvious candidate for underground power generation. That would make the machines not just a source of raw materials but a source of energy. The dependency of the underground on the machines would be total and deeply uncomfortable. Communication technology in Speranza is implied by the coordination of surface operations. Shani runs a security and intelligence operation that requires real-time information from the surface. Raiders need to be able to reach extraction support. The communications infrastructure for that is another layer of maintained technical capacity. The question of how Speranza communicates with other underground communities, if they exist, is unanswered in the current law. If Toledo is a city-state with multiple neighborhoods and other communities beyond it, there must be some way they share information. Whether that's physical messengers, radio, or something else, shapes how the broader underground network functions. The technical knowledge that Speranza has accumulated over 20 years is a kind of capital that doesn't appear on the kitbash economy's ledger. It's the intellectual infrastructure that makes the material economy possible. Lose the people who know how things work, and the things stop working very quickly. The vulnerability of knowledge-dependent communities to loss of key personnel is one of the most realistic pressures the law implies. Celeste as a single point of failure for Speranza's technical systems is a risk the community presumably lives with and tries to mitigate through training and documentation. But no documentation fully replaces the person who understands the systems intuitively. The raider skill tree in the game reflects genuine learning curves that the law implies are real within the world. Nobody starts as an expert. The skills that keep you alive on the surface are developed through repetition, near misses, mentorship, and the slow accumulation of situations you survived that taught you something. The progression system is a compressed version of a real process. Chapter 8: Community, Culture, and What Keeps People Going. Survival communities are not just collections of people who happen to be alive in the same place. They are cultures. They develop language, ritual, hierarchy, identity, humor, grief, and the specific kind of solidarity that comes from shared danger. Speranza is all of those things, and the law gives us enough glimpses of it to start building a picture. The Speranza proverb, quoted in the law, is evidence that the community has a living folklore. Proverbs don't emerge from committees. They crystallize from repeated experience. Someone said something that fit a truth so precisely that other people started repeating it. Eventually it became attributed not to a person, but to the community itself. The proverb about owning the dark is specifically about reframing a limitation as a strength. Underground communities face a genuine psychological challenge in maintaining morale against the basic human preference for open spaces and sunlight. A proverb that reframes darkness as ownership rather than confinement is doing active psychological work for the community. The humor that would exist in Speranza is entirely absent from the game's explicit lore, which tends toward the serious and the historical. But communities under sustained stress almost universally develop dark humor as a coping mechanism. The raiders of Speranza almost certainly have a vocabulary of dark jokes about machines, bad runs, and the surface that outsiders wouldn't find funny. Dark humor in extreme environments is not a sign of emotional numbness. It's actually a sophisticated, adaptive mechanism. It processes fear through laughter. It builds in-group solidarity through shared references. It makes the unbearable bearable without denying that it's unbearable. Raiders who've been at this for years are probably very funny in a very specific way. The names raiders give to surface locations, the dam battlegrounds being the most prominent example, reflect a community in the process of naming its world. Names create ownership. When you name a place, you claim a relationship to it. Speranza's naming of the surface is a form of cultural assertion over a territory that physically belongs to the machines. The language of the underground community, what words mean, what phrases carry weight, what euphemisms exist for death and loss and the surface, would be one of the richest veins of lore that Ark Raiders hasn't yet made explicit. Communities that share extreme experiences develop specialized vocabulary within a generation. The social rituals around raider departures and returns would be significant. In any culture where a segment of the population regularly faces death, the community develops ways to mark those transitions. Saying goodbye has weight. Coming home has ceremony. The absence of someone who doesn't return is a social event that the community processes collectively. The memorial culture suggested by the Keeping the Memory mission points toward a community that takes its dead seriously. The helmet recovered from the first wave battlefield is a physical object around which grief and memory can organize. The mission isn't just about recovering an item, it's about the community's relationship to its own history of sacrifice. The economic relationships within Speranza are more complex than a simple barter system. The vendors who provide gear, buy salvage, and run quests are nodes in an information and material network as much as they are commercial operators. The commerce of Speranza is also its intelligence infrastructure. The social position of Celeste as founder and technical anchor of Speranza would carry enormous weight within the community. She's not just someone who runs things, she's someone who built the thing those things run within. Her authority derives not from political appointment, but from the fact that without her, there is no Speranza. That's a form of legitimacy that's very hard to challenge. The authority of Shani as operational head of surface activities would derive from a different source, competence in an immediately life or death domain. Raiders come back or they don't, and the quality of Shani's planning and intelligence work directly affects which of those outcomes happens. Her authority is renewed by every successful extraction. The relationship between Celeste's structural authority and Shani's operational authority suggests a governance model that balances different kinds of expertise. Neither is subordinate to the other in the way that a traditional hierarchy would have them. They're co-equal in different domains that overlap at the critical interface of keeping people alive. The existence of traders and vendors as a distinct class within Speranza's social structure suggests that market functions have been preserved and formalized even in the absence of conventional currency. The traders are not parasites on a survival community. They are the mechanism by which materials flow to where they're needed and skills are compensated for their value. Trust within a small underground community under sustained external threat would be both more intense and more fragile than in ordinary social circumstances. More intense because you have to trust the people next to you with your life on a regular basis. More fragile because a betrayal, a raider who takes and doesn't give back, a trader who cheats, a leader who makes a catastrophic call has consequences that ripple through a community too small to absorb them easily. The raider code of conduct, the unwritten rules mentioned in law references, would exist precisely because the community is small and the stakes are total. You don't steal from people you depend on for survival. You don't abandon a teammate on the surface. You bring back what you promised to bring back. These aren't moral abstractions. They're operational requirements. The tension between cooperation and competition in Ark Raiders is built into the game's PvPvE structure, but its lore expression is more nuanced. Raiders compete for salvage. Raiders also need each other in ways that raw competition would destroy. The unwritten code is the social technology that manages that tension. What happens to raiders who violate the code is not specified in detail, but the existence of hostile raiders as an enemy category suggests that the most extreme violations result in expulsion or voluntary departure from the Speranza community. The rogue raiders are people who no longer operate within the social contract. They've gone outside it in the most literal way possible. The underground community's relationship to time would be distinctive. Without sunlight cycles regulating the biological clock in a natural way, the rhythms of life in Speranza would be artificially maintained. Work cycles, rest periods, the social management of time in an environment where it doesn't automatically organize itself is another layer of community engineering. Children and their education in Speranza are completely absent from the game's content, but they would be the community's most important long-term project. The transmission of the skills needed to survive, the technical knowledge to maintain the city, the raider skills to operate on the surface, the medical and commercial knowledge to run the economy, All of it has to be passed to a generation that didn't experience what the founders did. What you teach children in a community like Speranza is a deep question. Do you teach them the history of the surface world as a lost paradise to be mourned? Do you teach it as a cautionary tale? Do you teach it as a goal to be eventually reclaimed? The answer to that question shapes the community's long-term identity and ambition more than any other single decision. The art, music, and culture that would exist in Speranza are not detailed in the game's current lore, but are implied by the depth of the world. Communities under sustained threat don't stop making art. They make more of it. Art is how humans process things that facts and plans can't contain. Speranza would have its artists, its musicians, its storytellers. The stories told in Speranza would be primarily about the surface, about what happened, about who was lost, about what was found, about the machines and the battles and the close calls. Those stories carry practical information as well as emotional weight. The distinction between story and intelligence briefing in Speranza is probably not as clear as it would be in a safer place. The community festivals or shared rituals that would mark time in Speranza, the anniversaries of the First Wave Battle, the founding of the city, significant raider achievements, exist as the social glue that holds a community together across the repetitive stress of everyday survival. Ritual creates shared identity. Shared identity creates the social will to keep going. The grief that Speranza carries from 20 years of raider losses is not a historical weight, but an ongoing accumulation. Every failed surface run adds to it. The community has developed ways to carry that grief without being paralyzed by it, because paralysis in this world is also a form of death. The resilience of the Speranza community is not the absence of damage, it's the presence of structures that process damage and continue functioning. The workshops keep working, the raiders keep running, the traders keep trading, the leaders keep deciding. The grief is real, and it doesn't stop any of it. Chapter 9, The Exodus and What Lies Beyond the Exodus, is the event that divides the world of Ark Raiders into two irreconcilable parts, the people who left and the people who stayed. 2 decades later, that division is not a memory. It is the defining fact of the current world, even if nobody in Speranza knows exactly what happened to the other half. The mechanics of the Exodus, as described in the lore, were logistically extraordinary. Mass evacuation to off-world colonies via the Acera spaceport and similar sites. The ships were real. The technology was real. The organizational capacity to execute it was real. And it was used to move a specific subset of humanity while the rest were left behind. The selection criteria for the Exodus are not detailed in the lore beyond the implication that wealth and power determined access. This is the most politically charged fact in Ark Raiders world building. The end of civilization was an opportunity, and those with the most resources took it, at the cost of those with less. The engineers who built the Exodus ships being left behind is the detail that carries the most moral weight. These were not people who lacked the skill to deserve a place on the ships. They were people whose labour was extracted and then discarded when it was no longer needed. That story is not unique to fiction. The phrase "the Exodus shuttles" roared into the heavens from massive sites like Acera spaceport, leaving a beleaguered Earth behind, carries the specific kind of tragedy that comes from departure, not destruction. The world wasn't ended by the Exodus, it was abandoned. There's a specific kind of grief reserved for abandonment. The colonies established by the Exodus survivors are referred to in the lore, but their current state is entirely unknown within the game's world. 20 years is 2 decades of development without Earth's constraints, or 2 decades of struggle in an alien environment, or something in between. What actually happened out there is one of the game's largest hanging threads. The technology that the Exodus colonists took with them was the best available. Given 20 years of presumably less constrained development in a space environment, the technological gap between the Exodus descendants and the underground communities of Earth could be enormous. All the colony conditions could have been brutal enough that survival consumed all available capacity. The theory that the Exodus descendants are sending the Ark machines back to Earth is the law's most politically and narratively interesting possibility. It would mean the machines are not an alien force or a rogue AI in the simple sense, but a tool of human intent, specifically the intent of people who chose to leave and who may have reasons to prevent those left behind from ever re-emerging. If the Exodus descendants are behind the Ark, their motivation matters enormously for how the community underground should understand their situation. Are the machines being sent to clear the surface for eventual recolonization by the returning Exodus people? Are they being sent to prevent any remaining Earth population from developing the capacity to follow them to space? The Exodus Codex entry's deliberate narrative adjacency to the Ark invasion timeline is the strongest textual evidence for the connection theory. The lore places the fact of the Exodus's advanced technology next to the fact of the Ark's arrival from space without making the connection explicit. That restraint is intentional. The game wants you to draw the inference, the emotional implication of the connection theory for raiders and the Speranza community is almost too heavy to hold directly. If the machines are human-made and human-directed, then the war is not humanity against machines. It's the abandoned against the escaped. That reframing changes everything about what resistance means. Raiders who operate on the surface in that interpretation are not just scavenging for survival. They are, without knowing it, resisting a policy of elimination enforced by people who share their species. The machines are the instrument of that policy. The Rust Belt is a managed exclusion zone. The alternative interpretation, that the Ark are autonomous and the Exodus survivors are themselves either unaware of what their machines are doing or unable to stop them, is not incompatible with the evidence. A system designed to clear Earth for recolonization that became self-directed and now runs without any human oversight would look identical from the Rust Belt perspective. The Exodus colonists, if they still exist and are still coherent as a community, presumably have their own understanding of what happened on Earth. Their history of the collapse of the machines, of what was left behind, is a different story told from a completely different vantage point. The two histories don't agree, by definition, because they were lived from opposite ends of the same event. What the Exodus community calls the people left on Earth, whether they're thought of as casualties, as an abandoned liability, as a threat to be managed, or as something they prefer not to think about at all, would tell you more about the moral character of that community than any other single fact. The off-world colony setting, if it ever becomes part of the game's playable world, would represent an extraordinary expansion of the law's scope. Moving from the underground of a destroyed Earth to the society that chose to leave would be a narrative leap that changes the genre of the story being told. There are hints in the environmental storytelling of the spaceport that the site was not uniformly used for the Exodus. The scale of the facility suggests multiple phases of use, possibly including pre-Exodus missions, and possibly including some form of ongoing use after the last ships left. The spaceport as a location hasn't finished telling its story. The arrival listings on the spaceport's departure boards, flagged earlier as a detail worth examining, suggest a pre-collapse expectation of return. Whether that was a scheduled return from orbital operations, a diplomatic mission from another space-capable nation, or something else entirely, those arrival listings were set before whatever happened happened. They were never updated because there was no one left to update them. The machine's apparent interest in the spaceport as a patrolled location could reflect multiple different things. If the Ark are maintaining infrastructure for future use, a launch site is the most strategically significant surface asset. If they're denying humans access to the only place from which a counter-response to wherever the machines come from could potentially be launched, that's a strategic choke point. Raiders who operate in the spaceport map area are therefore, in a very specific sense, fighting over the most symbolically and strategically significant piece of ground on the planet. The place where the world's last organized departure happened. The place that might need to be functional again if humanity ever wants to take the fight to whoever sent the machines. The scale of what retaking the spaceport and re-establishing launch capability would require is so far beyond the current resources of the underground community that it functions in the lore as a horizon rather than a goal. But horizons are what give direction. Even if you can't reach them, they tell you which way to walk. Chapter 10. Reading Ark Raiders. As a complete world, Ark Raiders earns its world-building reputation not by giving you everything at once, but by making the gaps themselves informative. Every unanswered question in this game is shaped in a way that tells you something about the answers that are possible. The mystery is structured. The decision by Embark Studios to set the game 20 years after the initial Ark arrival, rather than during the first contact, is a storytelling choice that changes everything about the emotional register. This is not a story of shock and response. It is a story of adaptation and endurance. The worst has already happened. The question is what comes next. The extraction shooter format, which many critics initially saw as limiting the narrative possibilities of the game, turns out to be a precise fit for the thematic content. Every run is a negotiation between need and risk. Every extraction is a small victory. Every death is a loss. The community absorbs. The mechanics are the metaphor. The PvPvE structure, where the primary threats are both machines and other humans, encodes the game's most honest statement about survival situations. External threats don't make people uniformly cooperative. Scarce resources make people compete. The machines and the Raiders vs. Raiders conflict are not two separate gameplay modes. They are the same story told twice. The Codex as a lore delivery mechanism respects the intelligence of players who want the full world and doesn't burden players who just want to play. The information is there for those who look. The game doesn't require you to engage with it. This is respectful design and also thematically appropriate. The world doesn't explain itself to you. You have to go looking. The environmental storytelling of the maps is the lore delivery mechanism that works on everyone, including people who have never opened the Codex. You see the ruins, you read them instinctively, you understand that something happened here before you did. That understanding is pre-verbal and immediate. The game uses it deliberately. The live service update structure of Ark Raiders, with new maps and story developments added over time, positions the game's narrative as genuinely ongoing rather than complete at launch. Players are not experiencing a finished story. They are watching and participating in a story being written. That's a different relationship between audience and text. The Stella Montis Unlock event, as a piece of participatory narrative, showed that Embark Studios is interested in the player community as a narrative actor rather than just an audience. The community did something in the game that opened a part of the world. Their collective action was the key. That's a design philosophy, not just a marketing event. The scale of the world implied by the lore, the broader underground network, the off-world colonies, the full extent of the Ark's surface presence, the pre-collapse civilization, of which the maps show only fragments, is vastly larger than any single game could render. That implied scale gives the game a sense of weight that its actual content doesn't fully have to carry. The moral clarity of the situation in Ark Raiders is deliberately compromised by the complexity of the villain category. If the Ark are machines, the villains are machines, simple and terrible. But if the Ark are human-made and human-directed, the villainy is human, which is a different kind of story with different implications for what resistance means and what victory could look like. The Raiders themselves are not uncomplicated heroes. They serve the community and themselves simultaneously. They operate within a code and violate it when benefit is sufficient. Some of them go rogue. The game doesn't celebrate them as heroes. It presents them as people doing what people do when the situation demands it. The underground communities of Ark Raiders are not presented as utopias, despite their survival against terrible odds. They have hierarchy, economic inequality, expressed through gear and resource access, social tensions, and the ongoing trauma of a community that loses members regularly. They are human communities, which means they are complicated. The machines, for all their menace, are in some ways the simplest element of the world. They behave consistently. They execute their programming. They don't lie or negotiate or surprise you socially the way other humans do. Their predictability is terrifying, but it's also, from a certain angle, a relief. You know where you stand with the machines. The human elements, the rogue raiders, the Exodus survivors, possibly directing the invasion, the social politics of Speranza, the traders with their own interests, are where the real unpredictability lives. Ark Raiders is, at its core, a game about what humans do to each other as much as what machines do to humans. The game's setting in Italy is not cosmetic. The environmental heritage of the region, its history of surviving catastrophes, including the eruption of Vesuvius that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, gives the world a resonance with real human experiences of ruin and survival. Italy has been the site of civilizational collapse and civilizational renewal multiple times. The lore knows that. The specific choice of the Campania region, including Naples and its surrounding geography, places the game in one of Europe's most geologically active areas. The Campi Flegrei volcanic system near Naples is one of the most monitored geological hazards in the world. That geography is not random. In a story where earthquakes and volcanic disruptions accelerated the collapse, the chosen region has particular historical resonance. The population of the region that would have been affected by the collapse in the game's version of reality was real. Southern Italy is one of the most densely populated parts of the Mediterranean. The scale of human loss implied by the collapse in that specific region is staggering when you hold the real demographic facts next to the fiction. The Ark Raiders world is doing something specific by choosing to destroy a real, populated, culturally rich region rather than a fictional or generically post-apocalyptic landscape. It invites a comparison between the ruins you're walking through and the place those ruins represent. It makes the loss concrete in a way that generic wasteland aesthetics don't. The game's reception, winning Best Multiplayer Game at the Game Awards 2025 and garnering generally favourable reviews, reflects a critical consensus that the world building succeeds where many multiplayer games fail. The lore is not a backdrop, it's a load-bearing structure. Remove it, and the gameplay feels thinner. Keep it, and the gameplay has weight. The reviewer who described Ark Raiders as having an intriguing world full of curiosities and payoffs is pointing at exactly what the lore achieves. Every time you find a detail that connects to another detail, every time an environmental clue confirms a codex entry, you get the specific satisfaction of a world that was assembled with intention. The game's community on Reddit and in fan spaces has taken the lore seriously enough to produce substantial analysis, theory, and lore video content. That kind of engagement from a player base doesn't happen with shallow world building. It happens when the world gives you enough material to work with and leaves enough gaps that you're motivated to fill them. The 10-year story commitment from Embark Studios, announced through PC Gamer, is a significant declaration. It means the studio is investing in the lore as a long-term project and expects the world to develop in ways that make the early access lore look like chapter 1 of a very long book. What's been uncovered so far is the prologue. The question of whether the Ark Raiders community will still be active and engaged 10 years from now to see that story through is unanswerable. Games have died and been resurrected. Live service narratives have been cut short by commercial realities. The ambition is real. The execution is ongoing. The outcome is genuinely unknown. What we can say with confidence based on the lore assembled in this video is that the foundation is strong. The world of Ark Raiders has genuine structural integrity as a piece of fiction. Its mysteries connect to each other. Its human stories have emotional truth. Its machines carry a weight of implication that grows heavier the more carefully you look at them. The underground of 2180 is a specific kind of place. Dark, warm, with human presence, smelling of workshop oil and salvage metal, and the thousands small meals that people make from whatever they could bring back from the surface. It holds together because people decided it would. And every day it holds is a decision remade. The Rust Belt above is a specific kind of place too. Open sky and machine noise, and the silence between patrol patterns and the weight of a world that used to be full of people who are mostly gone now. Raiders move through it fast because standing still is dying, but they see it. They know what it is, and they come back. Between those two places, underground and surface, darkness and open sky, endurance and risk, the world of Ark Raiders tells its story. It's still being written. What gets added next will change how we read what's already there. That's the nature of a living world. It doesn't stay still long enough for you to finish looking at it. Chapter 11. The First Wave in Detail. The first wave is the event that defines the before and after of the world that Raiders live in. It was not the end of the world in a single strike. It was the beginning of a process that humanity barely survived, and the evidence of it is still scattered across every map in the game if you know where to look. The first wave machines are described in the lore as less advanced than the machines players encounter in the current game. That comparison is important because it implies a manufacturing progression or design evolution. Someone or something looked at the results of the first wave and made the next generation of machines better at the job. The Battle of Victory Ridge is the defining event of the first wave, the moment when the underground community's ancestors assembled for a coordinated stand against the machines. The name Victory Ridge is the name the survivors gave it. The machines don't name anything. Only humans name the places where they fought and won. What made Victory Ridge a victory rather than another defeat is not detailed explicitly in the lore. It was a coordinated human effort against the remaining First Wave forces. But coordination of that kind among scattered surviving communities implies someone had the organizational capacity to bring people together during the worst period in living memory. Who coordinated the Battle of Victory Ridge is one of the unsung lore questions. The game focuses on the battle's outcome and legacy rather than its leadership. But someone planned it. Someone communicated across the underground network. Someone convinced people from different communities to show up at the same place and fight together. The 20 to 30 year gap between the first wave and the second wave that followed suggests the machines either needed time to be resupplied from wherever they originated, or the first deployment was intended as a limited engagement and the second was the main event, or the Ark went through a period of assessment and redesign before escalating. The human communities used that gap period. The underground settlements that were possible during the first wave became more established. The Raiders as a class emerged and developed their operational knowledge. The kitbash economy took shape. The community built itself in the window that the machines provided by pausing. The first wave machines that were left behind after the Battle of Victory Ridge continued to operate on the surface after the human victory. They didn't stop just because the organized invasion force was pushed back. The Rust Belt in the current game still contains functional first wave machines in certain areas, decades-old remnants still running their original programming. The sight of a first wave machine, visibly older and more deteriorated than a current Ark unit but still operational, would be a specific kind of unsettling for an experienced raider. These things have been running for 20 years without maintenance. They were designed to last. Whatever built them didn't plan for them to stop. The oral history of the first wave, passed down through Speranza from survivors who were present, would be the foundational mythology of the underground community. The stories of what happened at the dam at Victory Ridge in the early days of the underground settlements are the stories that give the community its sense of who it is and why it survived. Celeste survived the first wave. This fact, stated in the law, makes her not just a founder but a living connection to the community's founding trauma. She was there. She remembers what the machines were like before the improvements. She knows what the underground was like before it was a city. That memory is institutional knowledge. The first wave casualties would have included people who were attempting to establish the underground communities before they were viable. The earliest days of the retreat underground, before the settlements were functional, would have been among the most dangerous. People died not just from the machines, but from exposure, starvation, and the structural failures of improvised shelters. The communities that survived the first wave and the gap between the waves were shaped by the specific losses of that period. Which skills were lost because the people who had them didn't survive? Which communities didn't make it, leaving their members to find other places? Which early settlements failed and which ones held and became what exists today? Speranza's status as the oldest neighbourhood of Toledo suggests it was among the earliest viable underground settlements in the region. Getting there first in the specific sinkhole geography of South Calabretta was either prescient planning or extraordinary luck, probably both. The Alcantara power plant that forms the heart of the dam battlegrounds was significant enough to be fought over in the first wave. Control of a power plant, even a damaged one, would be strategically valuable both to defending humans and to the invading machines. Whatever the machines wanted with that site goes unexplained in the current law. The scrapyard areas on the dam battlegrounds map are where first wave equipment came to rest, either destroyed in the battle or abandoned when the machines withdrew after Victory Ridge. Raiders scavenging first wave wreckage are effectively mining the battlefield of their community's founding moment. The emotional texture of the dam battlegrounds for raiders who know their history would be complicated. This is where the community proved it could fight. This is where people died so that others could survive. This is also now a work site, a place you go to strip components for the economy. The sacred and the practical occupy the same ground. The Keeping the Memory mission, in which Celeste sends you to find a specific Raider's helmet at the First Wave Memorial, is the game's most direct engagement with that emotional complexity. The helmet is in the Formicae Hills section of the map, in territory that requires navigating active arc presence to reach. The memorial is not safe to visit. Remembrance requires risk. The helmet as a memorial object is specifically chosen. Helmets protect the head. They're what a person wears when they expect to be in danger. A helmet found at a battle site tells you what the person who wore it was expecting. They knew they were walking into something deadly. They wore their helmet and went anyway. The first wave and its battles established the tactical knowledge base that raiders still use. The weaknesses identified in first wave machines were the beginning of a systematic understanding of arc design. Whatever was learned at the dam and at Victory Ridge is still operationally relevant 20 years later because the newer machines share architectural principles with the older ones. The tactical knowledge accumulated through the first wave is one of the most valuable forms of inherited intelligence that Speranza possesses. It was bought at enormous cost. It lives in the lore, in the codex entries, in the stories Celeste tells, and in the instinctive behaviours of veteran raiders who learned from people who were actually there. The generation of raiders now operating on the surface were mostly not alive during the first wave. They know it through stories. That generational distance from the founding trauma has cultural implications. The first wave is legend to them in the way that founding events become legend to every subsequent generation, more important and less tactically detailed than the people who lived it would want. The danger of the first wave becoming fully mythologized rather than practically remembered is that the tactical detail gets replaced by the emotional narrative. Victory Ridge is the moment humanity proved it could fight back. That's true and important. But the specific lessons of how the machines behaved, what worked against them, what didn't, are the part that saves lives, and those need to stay specific. Celeste's mission to retrieve the helmet is, in part, an act of keeping specificity alive. She's not asking for a general memorial. She's asking for a specific person's helmet. A specific person who died in a specific battle at a specific location for specific reasons. The more specific the memory, the more it resists becoming a comfortable abstraction. The First Wave's legacy is not just military and tactical, it's social. The communities that survived it were shaped by which people they lost and which they kept. A community that lost its medical expertise in the First Wave and had to rebuild that capacity is different from one that happened to shelter its doctors. The composition of the survivors defines the capabilities of the settlement. The Raider class emerged from the First Wave period in a specific way. The people who went back to the surface after the initial retreat underground were not called Raiders yet. They were just desperate. They were people who needed things that couldn't be found underground and were willing to risk the surface to get them. That willingness, over time, became a specialization. The specialization became an identity. The equipment and tactics of those earliest surface runners would be radically more primitive than what raiders use today. Salvaged civilian gear. No systematic knowledge of machine patrol patterns. No established extraction network. Just need and willingness and the basic instinct for survival operating under extreme conditions. The fact that raiders became skilled enough to win at Victory Ridge from that starting point is itself a testament to the speed of learning under mortal pressure. 20 years of trial and error, with death as the feedback mechanism for wrong answers, produces expertise with a quality that no peaceful environment can replicate. The Victory Ridge battle would have required raiders to act in coordination in a way that their individual, scavenging-focused operational history hadn't necessarily prepared them for. The tactical shift from solo or small group surface runs to an organized military stand is significant. Someone taught them, or someone emerged from among them who knew how, or they learned on the day at great cost. The period immediately after Victory Ridge, when the machines had been pushed back and the community was assessing its losses and its situation, would have been among the most psychologically complex moments in Speranza's history. They had won something, they had paid enormously for it, and they didn't know yet that a worse wave was coming. Chapter 12. The Second Wave and the Final Retreat. The Second Wave changed the war from a contested struggle to a managed endurance. When it arrived, it was categorically different from what had come before. The law doesn't provide precise timelines for the Second Wave's arrival, but its effect is unambiguous. Humanity left the surface for good. The machines of the Second Wave are described as far more advanced and far more relentless than the First Wave. The 20 to 30-year gap between waves had been used by whoever made the machines to substantially upgrade them. Every weakness the raiders had exploited in the First Wave had apparently been addressed. The effect of the Second Wave on the underground communities would have been immediate and devastating. The knowledge base that raiders had built about machine behavior became partially obsolete overnight. The tactical routines that had kept people alive against First Wave machines required urgent revision against their successors. The final retreat of humanity underground following the Second Wave is described in the lore as the event that made the surface definitively uninhabitable for human settlement. Before the Second Wave, the surface was dangerous but contested. After it, the surface was machine territory. What the Second Wave was specifically designed to do on the surface is unclear. It drove humanity underground, but that could be a goal in itself, a means to an end, or simply a byproduct of a different objective. The machines of the Second Wave don't appear to be building anything obvious on the surface. They're not constructing visible infrastructure. They're patrolling, maintaining, waiting. The psychological impact of the second wave on the communities that had survived the first wave would be severe. They had won at Victory Ridge. They had built something in the gap between waves. They had reason to believe they could survive. Then the second wave arrived and demonstrated that the previous victory had been against a degraded version of what was actually out there. That recalibration, learning that the first wave machines were the worst you'd seen, but not the worst that existed, is a specific kind of defeat that doesn't look like a defeat from outside. The community survived. They retreated underground. They regrouped. But the loss was real. The surface was gone. The communities that exist in 2018, in the game's present, are the result of 2 decades of adaptation to the post-second wave reality. They're not adapting to a new crisis. They're operating within the equilibrium that the second wave imposed. Go underground. Raid the surface. Survive. Don't try to reclaim. Just persist. The persistence of that equilibrium is not guaranteed. The second wave of machines continues to operate on the surface. They haven't gone dormant. They haven't escalated further. The situation has been stable, in its terrible way, for 20 years. But stability imposed by machines pursuing a programmed objective is not the same as peace. It's a cage that happens not to be closing any faster. The specific capabilities of second-wave machines that made them so much more effective than their predecessors are not fully catalogued in the available lore, but the practical consequences are clear. Raiders face them every day. The tactics that barely worked against first-wave machines don't work at all against the current ones. The ongoing development of raider tactics and equipment against the second-wave machines is the operational reality of the game's present. Every piece of ARC technology studied, every behavior pattern observed, every tactical innovation tested on the surface contributes to the community's growing understanding of what it's fighting. The pace of that learning against the second-wave machines is not specified, but the fact that raiders are still operational 20 years into the second wave suggests they've adapted enough to maintain viable surface operations. They haven't stopped. They haven't been eliminated. The adaptation is real, even if the balance remains brutal. Some of the most experienced raiders operating in the current game's timeline were very young during the second wave. They have memories of the transition. They remember when the machines changed. They're the bridge between the tactical knowledge of the first wave period and the current operational reality. Their experience is specifically valuable. The training of new raiders in the post-second wave reality necessarily incorporates the lessons of that transition. You learn to fight the machines that exist now, not the ones your predecessors fought, but the structural knowledge of ARC design that has accumulated from both waves informs how you approach the current challenge. The second wave established the world that the game inhabits. It's not just backstory. It is the condition of every moment of play. The machines that patrol every map are second wave machines. The extraction windows, the tactical challenges, the gear requirements, all of it is calibrated to the second wave reality. The first wave is history. The second wave is the present. The question of whether there will be a third wave is not addressed in the current lore, but is implicit in the structure of what's already happened. The machines came once, they came again with improvements. If there is something behind them with the capacity to continue upgrading and deploying them, a third wave is a possibility the underground communities presumably live with as a background anxiety. What a third wave would look like, given the trajectory from first to second wave improvements, is a question that strategic thinkers in Speranza would have to consider, even if it's too terrifying to discuss openly. The second wave machines are already beyond the community's capacity to contest at scale. A further improvement would effectively end organised surface operations for raiders. The community's response to the possibility of a third wave would presumably be to prepare as much as possible while operating normally. You can't stop what you can't see coming. You can be as strong as possible when it arrives. That means continuing the current operation, building knowledge, improving equipment, maintaining the community's capacity, which is exactly what Speranza does. Chapter 13. Names, Places, and the Geography of Survival. The place names of Ark Raiders are one of the most underanalyzed layers of its world building. Names are decisions. Naming something means choosing what to call it based on what matters about it. And in a survival community, where every decision reflects a set of values, the names people choose are revealing. Speranza means hope in Italian. The person who named it chose to name their city after the quality they most needed it to represent. That's not wishful thinking. That's psychological engineering. You name a place Hope so that saying its name out loud is an act of assertion. Every time someone says they're going home to Speranza, they're saying they're going home to hope. Toledo as a city-state name brings with it associations from the Spanish city of Toledo, historically a center of craft, culture, and the meeting of different civilizations. Whether the name was chosen for those associations or for more local reasons, it carries a weight of meaning that the underground community may or may not be aware of in 2180. The Rust Belt is a naming choice that reflects the underground community's relationship to the surface. They named it after its condition, corroded and industrial and dangerous. But rust is also transformation. Metal that rusts is metal that's becoming something else. The Rust Belt is a world in process. Victory Ridge is named for what happened there, not for what it is geographically. The community chose to name a geographic feature after a human event. This is how places become meaningful. They carry the memory of what happened at them rather than just describing their physical form. Raiders who visit Victory Ridge know it as a place where something was decided. The dam battlegrounds carries a similar naming logic. The Alcantara power plant is a functional descriptor. The dam battlegrounds is a historical descriptor. The community chose the historical name, which tells you what they consider more important about that location. It's not a power plant to them, it's where they fought. Formicae Hills, meaning anthill hills, is either a pre-collapse name preserved by geographic habit or a post-collapse name assigned because of the shape of the terrain. The Italian specificity of it suggests pre-collapse origin. The hills were there before the machines. They'll probably be there after. Stella Montis means Star Mountain in Latin. The choice of Latin rather than Italian for that name suggests either a pre-collapse institutional affiliation, given that Latin is used for formal institutional and scientific naming, or a post-collapse decision by someone with classical education. Either way, it's a formal name for a serious place. The Atera spaceport uses a real-world place name. Aquera is a real city in the province of Naples. The game's decision to use real geography in this way grounds the fiction in actual spatial reality. If you know where Acera is, you know where the spaceport is. The fiction occupies real space. The unnamed spaces are as significant as the named ones. The areas of the Rust Belt that don't have raider names are areas that raiders haven't gone or haven't survived to name. The edge of the known map is the edge of the knowledge the community has bought with lives. Beyond it, the world has no names yet. The underground network that connects the various communities and access points has its own implied geography, a three-dimensional map of tunnels and chambers that doesn't appear directly in the surface gameplay, but is the literal foundation of everything. The underground geography is the geography of survival. The distances involved in the underground network, if it spans the region implied by the multiple map access points, are significant. Moving people and materials through tunnel networks across tens of kilometers is a logistical challenge with no easy surface analog. The infrastructure required to do that reliably implies engineering investment that predates the current community. The relationship between the surface geography and the underground geography in the Campania region is one of the most interesting physical details the game uses. The sinkhole geology that created the spaces Speranza inhabits is a real characteristic of the area around Naples and its volcanic and karst landscape. The game's architecture is geologically plausible. South Calabretta, the district that became Speranza, doesn't exist by that name in the real world, but its characteristics, being swallowed by sinkholes and sitting above void spaces, describe conditions found in the real Campania region due to its volcanic and limestone geology. The fiction is built on real physical processes. The Campi Flegrei system near Naples is one of the most monitored supervolcanic systems in Europe. In the game's version of history, the environmental catastrophe that accelerated the collapse would have been especially severe in a region sitting above that geological reality. The surface conditions in the Rust Belt are not randomly hostile. They have a specific geological reason. The waterlogged battlegrounds described in some surface areas are consistent with the flooding that would result from the collapse's disruption of drainage and sea level stability. The southern Italian coast's relationship to the Mediterranean means flooding would be a specific and ongoing feature of post-collapse surface conditions in that region. The arid desert zones described as part of the Rust Belt environment present a contrast to the flooding in other areas. Localized climate disruption, where some areas became drier and some became wetter due to the breakdown of normal weather patterns, is consistent with the kind of planetary scale environmental catastrophe the collapse represents. The ARC machines operating across all these different environmental conditions, wet and dry, hot and cold, low altitude and mountain high altitude, were designed for the full range of Earth's surface conditions. That environmental adaptability is another data point for deliberate, sophisticated engineering rather than improvised deployment. The names that raiders give to machine types and behaviors are also a form of geographic and cultural mapping. Apollo for the flying drones, the generic categories for different ground unit types. These names are functional shorthand within the operational vocabulary of people who need to communicate quickly about what they're seeing. The community's growing vocabulary for ARC machine types and behaviors is an invisible map of the war being fought. Every new designation for a new behavior pattern represents raiders who survived an encounter with something they hadn't named yet. Every name is paid for in adrenaline and near death. The physical act of mapping the Rust Belt, recording safe routes, machine patrol patterns, extraction point conditions, and structural integrity of ruins, is one of the most valuable things raiders do beyond bringing back materials. The map is never finished. The machines move, structures collapse, new hazards emerge. The map requires constant maintenance. Chapter 14. The Vendors of Speranza and What They Know. The vendors and quest givers of Speranza are the human faces of the underground community's operational infrastructure. Each one represents a different domain of expertise and a different relationship to the surface world. Their quests are not just content delivery, they are character studies in what survival specialization looks like. Celeste, as a quest giver, sends raiders on missions that serve both the community's practical needs and her own emotional connection to the world's history. The helmet recovery mission is personal. It's about memory and grief and the community's relationship to its founding trauma. That she frames it as a community service doesn't make it less personal. The personality implied by Celeste's quest design is someone who has been carrying weight for 20 years and has found that the only way to carry it is to keep it moving. Give it to someone, ask them to go find something. Make the grief into a task. The task has an end. Grief doesn't. Shani, as an operational authority figure, sends raiders on missions with more immediate tactical rationale. Her quests are about intelligence gathering, route assessment, and engagement with the immediate machine threat. She thinks in operational terms because that's what keeps people alive. The personal is a luxury she can't afford to prioritize. The contrast between Celeste's and Shani's quest styles reflects the two modes of leadership that sustain a community under sustained threat. One maintains the community's sense of meaning and continuity. One maintains its operational effectiveness. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. The medical vendor, whoever holds that role in Speranza's social structure, would be among the most ethically complex characters in the underground community. They hold the means of survival in a world where medical supplies are scarce and acquired at great risk. The decisions about who gets what treatment and at what cost are life and death decisions made in the dark. The trader who buys and sells arc alloys and surface salvage is running what would, in pre-collapse terms, be a commodities market. They're pricing risk. A component that required a dangerous run to acquire is worth more than one, found in an accessible area. The trader knows this, and the raiders know the trader knows it. The negotiation between them is the economy's practical operation. The weapons dealer or armourer in Speranza is a craftsperson as much as a merchant. They're building things from components that weren't designed to work together. The expertise required to do that safely is not trivial. A weapon that fails in the hands of a raider on the surface is not a product defect in the ordinary sense. It's a death sentence. The intelligence analyst, if such a role exists formalized in Speranza, is synthesizing raider reports, codex entries, observed machine behaviors, and environmental changes into operational intelligence. That role, if it exists, is one of the most strategically valuable in the community. The person who understands the patterns of the enemy's behavior better than the enemy understands the community's is holding a significant advantage. The community's medical history, its accumulated experience with the specific injuries and illnesses that underground life and surface raids produce, is a form of medical knowledge that has no pre-collapse equivalent. The injuries from arc machine encounters, the environmental hazards of both the underground and the surface, the psychological stresses of the raider life. These require adaptations to medical practice that had to be developed from scratch. The teachers and trainers of Speranza, the people who pass skills to the next generation of raiders and technicians and medical practitioners, are doing one of the most invisible and most essential jobs in the community. You don't notice good training until you see someone under pressure, doing the right thing without thinking. The trainer who produced that is someone whose work is saving lives they'll never see. The social dynamics between different vendor factions in Speranza would carry the traces of 2 decades of shared history. Who helped whom during the second wave arrival? Who made which decisions in the early desperate days? Who built the city and who maintained it? And who has benefited more than they contributed? Those histories don't disappear in a small community. They get embedded in relationships. The quest systems in Arc Raiders are, in a real sense, the primary mechanism through which players engage with the lore of these characters. The quests give the vendors a voice and a perspective. They make them people rather than interfaces. The world building lives in those interactions as much as it lives in the codex entries. The physical space of Speranza in which the vendors operate would be specific and particular. Workshops have a smell. Medical areas have a sound. Trading spaces have a specific kind of ambient energy. The underground city's sensory environment is as much a part of the world as its history or its political structure. Chapter 15. Fan theories, community readings, and the edges of the lore. The player community around Arc Raiders has generated a substantial body of analysis, theory, and lore interpretation since the game launched. These fan-developed readings are not canonical. They are the work of engaged players trying to fill the gaps that the game deliberately leaves open, and some of them are remarkably compelling. The most persistent fan theory remains the Exodus-Arc connection. The evidence supporting it, technological compatibility between Arc components and human salvage, the codex adjacency of the Exodus entry and the Arc arrival timeline, the Arc machines arriving from space, is circumstantial but coherent. The community has developed this theory with considerable detail. A variant of the Exodus theory suggests that the Ark machines were not built by the colonists themselves, but were sent ahead before the colonists left Earth, as a clearance mechanism that would prepare the planet for recolonization by the time the Exodus ships were ready to return. This variant makes the machines older than they look, and the Exodus's moral culpability more premeditated. The rogue AI theory has its own community of supporters, and they focus primarily on the machine's behavioral consistency and apparent lack of communication with any directing authority. If someone in space were controlling these machines, evidence of coordination between surface machine behavior and off-world command should be detectable. The fact that raiders have found no such evidence suggests to this reading that the machines are self-directed. The extraterrestrial theory is the least popular in community discussion, despite being one of the 3 options the game's lore identifies. The argument against it is primarily the technological compatibility point. True alien technology would not interface with human salvage components the way Ark technology does. The machines are too human-compatible to be non-human in origin. Community analysis of the spaceport's arrival board detail has generated significant discussion. The most popular reading is that the arrival listings were set during the final Exodus preparations, expecting supply ships or personnel transfers that never arrived because the collapse moved faster than expected. The arrival board is the ghost of a plan that was overtaken by events. The theory that Stella Montis contains preserved human genetic material or biological knowledge has been popular since the map's release. The facility's isolation, its apparent research function, and the environmental detail suggesting large-scale preservation infrastructure are all cited. The counter-argument is that raiders operating in the facility haven't found direct evidence of this, only suggestive environmental clues. Community cartographers have attempted to map the underground network implied by the various extraction points across the game's maps, inferring the shape of the tunnel system from access point locations. The resulting inferred maps suggest an underground network considerably more extensive than any individual map implies. The full extent of Toledo as a city-state might be surprisingly large. The hostile raider faction has generated theory about its origin, leadership, and goals. One reading is that they are former Speranza community members who left following a specific conflict with the leadership. Another is that they are survivors from a different, underground community entirely, one that Speranza hasn't had contact with, and whose social development took a different path. The question of whether other functioning underground communities exist beyond Toledo has produced considerable community speculation. The logic of survival suggests that the people who settled Speranza were not the only survivors of the Campania region. Other groups would have found other underground spaces and established other settlements. What became of them is one of the lore's most open questions. The cultural differences between underground communities, if they exist, would be fascinating. 2 groups of survivors in different geographic underground spaces, facing similar challenges but with different starting resources, different skill sets, and different leadership, would develop distinctly different cultures within a generation. The underground world of 2180 may be as culturally diverse as the surface world of 2160. Community analysis of the environmental storytelling has documented dozens of specific details that weren't obviously notable until someone connected them to something else. A piece of equipment found in one map location that matches an equipment type referenced in a codex entry written about a different location. A name carved into a surface structure that matches a name in a vendor's backstory. The game rewards obsessive attention. The timeline reconstruction that the community has assembled from codex entries, environmental details, and developer statements is one of the most impressive collaborative lore projects produced around the game. The reconstructed timeline is not complete. It has gaps and disputed dates, but it gives the world a historical spine that makes individual lore fragments more comprehensible. The community's engagement with the Stella Montis unlock event as a narrative event rather than just a content delivery mechanism produced some of the game's most interesting collective discussion. Players who participated felt they had done something within the world. The contribution of resources was a narrative act as well as a mechanical one. The line between game and story was deliberately blurred. Developer communications through PC Gamer and other outlets have been carefully parsed by the community for lore implications. The confirmation of a 10-year story commitment, references to new factions and locations, the specific language used when discussing the arc's nature. Each of these communications is analysed for what it implies about where the story is going. The arc of the larger narrative, if the developer communications and existing lore are read together, suggests a story moving toward revelation. The current state of the world is one of endurance and mystery. The game's long-term structure points toward answers to the fundamental questions. Where do the machines come from? What happened to the Exodus colonists? Can the surface ever be reclaimed? The community has also generated significant discussion about what reclaiming the surface would actually look like mechanically and narratively. It would require defeating or neutralizing the Ark at a scale far beyond current capability. It would require addressing whatever is directing or maintaining them. It would require the underground communities to coordinate in ways they haven't managed since Victory Ridge. That scale of challenge, if it becomes the game's eventual narrative goal, would represent a fundamental shift in what Ark Raiders is about. Currently, it's about survival within a stable, terrible situation. A narrative drive toward reclamation would make it about change, about ending the equilibrium rather than maintaining it. That's a different kind of story. The community's emotional investment in the lore of Ark Raiders, the volume and quality of fan analysis, the engagement with events like Stella Montis, the persistent discussion of theories and details reflects a world-building achievement that not every game manages. Players believe in this world. They want to understand it. They argue about it. That's the sign of a living fictional world. The fact that this is a multiplayer extraction shooter, a genre not typically associated with deep narrative engagement, makes the community's lore investment all the more significant. Ark Raiders did something that the genre's history suggested was unlikely. It built a world that players want to live in intellectually, not just mechanically. The exploration of the Rust Belt is happening in the community's imagination as much as it's happening on the game's maps. Chapter 16. Small details that change everything. There are details in Ark Raiders that most players walk past without registering. Some of them are aesthetic. Some of them are structural to the lore in ways that only become clear when you've absorbed enough of the world to recognize what you're looking at. This chapter is for those details. The glass domes of the Naples subway station, visible in the game's menu screen, are designed with architectural accuracy to the real Naples metro system, which is famous for its art-filled stations. In the game's present, they're ruins. In the real world, they're operational. That parallel is either a coincidence of art direction or a deliberate choice to root the fiction in a recognizable, real-world cultural achievement. The menu screen is the first image most players see before they enter the game. The choice of that specific image, Naples Metro domes in ruin, is a deliberate framing. Before you play, you see what was lost. The beauty of the pre-collapse world is the first thing the game shows you. Then you descend into the present. The naming of Apollo for the Ark drone type that relies on thrusters for flight carries a specific historical resonance. The Apollo program was humanity's greatest achievement in reaching beyond Earth. Naming a machine that came from beyond Earth to subjugate humanity after that program is either a coincidence in Ark machine taxonomy or a pointed irony. The compatible technology between Ark components and human salvage is the lore detail that rewards the most sustained attention. Compatibility is not accidental in engineering. Things are made to be compatible. Something made the Ark components compatible with human salvage. That something either is humanity or designed with human technology in mind. The texture of Ark machine surfaces, as visible in the game's Unreal Engine 5 rendering, shows weathering patterns consistent with extended exposure to the same environmental conditions that weather human structures. The machines have been in the weather for years. They show it. They were built to last through that exposure, but they weren't immune to it. The sound design of the Ark machines, which is not covered in text-based lore, but is part of the world building, creates a specific acoustic vocabulary for machine presence. Raiders who've been topside enough can hear the difference between machine types by their operational sounds. That auditory literacy is survival knowledge. The safe pocket mechanics lore implication that some objects are valuable enough to protect from total loss raises a question about what raiders choose to keep in that protected space. The practical answer is whatever is most useful. The emotional answer might be something different. A photograph, a small object from the pre-collapse world, something that matters for reasons the economy doesn't capture. The structural integrity monitoring that must be ongoing in Speranza, given that it's a city hanging over a void, creates a specific ambient anxiety in the community that would be easy to take for granted. Occasional groans from the structure, sensors that need checking. The city that keeps you safe requires constant maintenance to remain safe. You trust it because the people who maintain it are doing their job. The visual detail of repair work in Speranza's architecture, patches on tunnel walls, reinforced joints, visible welds where structures have been shored up, tells a story of ongoing maintenance effort. The city is not pristine. It shows its age and its repairs. Every repair is evidence of someone's labour and vigilance. The vendor's physical spaces within Speranza would be worn and specific in the way that any workspace used intensively over years becomes worn and specific. Grooves in work surfaces where tools are habitually placed, stains from materials that didn't wash out. The organised chaos of a workspace where everything has a place, because there's no room for anything to not have a place. The Ark machines that pause mid-patrol, the behaviour noted in community analysis, are a detail that the game includes without explanation. Unexplained machine behaviours are the category of observation most likely to eventually connect to a larger revelation. The machines do this for a reason. That reason hasn't been disclosed, but it's there, waiting in the lore somewhere ahead. The arrival listings at the spaceport are a visual detail small enough to require deliberate framing to notice. The designers put them there. They knew players would eventually look. The detail was placed to be found, which means it was placed to mean something. In a game where environmental storytelling is as deliberate as this one, nothing is accidental. The distance between the known maps and the implied edge of the Rust Belt is a spatial detail that the game's current content doesn't fully explore. The maps exist within a larger geography that the game implies but doesn't render. That implied space is where future content lives. The horizon suggests what's coming. The way Speranza's architecture incorporates pre-collapse transit infrastructure is a detail that architectural analysis of the map has documented. The proportions of certain tunnels match standard subway tunnel specifications. The remnants of track infrastructure appear in certain underground spaces. The city was built around the skeleton of something that used to move. The community's relationship to pre-collapse objects as either tools or relics would produce a specific material culture. Some objects are stripped for parts without hesitation. Some are preserved because they carry meaning. The line between the functional and the memorial in Speranza is drawn differently than it would be in a world with plenty. In scarcity, the meaningful and the useful have to negotiate. The game's choice to set the action in a real geographic region rather than a generically post-apocalyptic landscape is one of the most meaningful creative decisions in its design. It tethers the fiction to reality in a way that gives the world building weight. When the lore talks about the region being devastated, you can look up what the region actually is and feel the loss more specifically. The Italian cultural references embedded in the lore, from the language of the place names to the aesthetic of the surviving architecture, ground the experience in a specific human tradition. Italy has survived catastrophe before. The civilization that built the structures raiders walked through had experience with loss and endurance. That history is not irrelevant to the fiction built on top of it. The quietness of the surface between machine encounters is a detail that the game's audio design apparently exploits. The Rust Belt is not a constant barrage of noise. There are moments of silence. That silence is its own kind of threat assessment. If it's quiet, either you're alone or something is about to not be quiet. Raiders learn to read silence the way other people read sound. The stars visible from the Rust Belt on clear nights, if the surface conditions allow for them, would be a specific kind of experience for raiders. Looking up at the sky where the Exodus ships went, where the Ark machines came from. The stars are not abstract in this world. They're the direction of the enemy and the direction of the community's worst abandonment. Looking up carries more weight here than it does anywhere else. Chapter 17. The Long Game. Embark Studios' commitment to a decade of story development in Ark Raiders is not just a commercial statement, it's a narrative philosophy. It says that the world being built here is intended to be lived in over time, to grow and change and reveal itself gradually in the way that complex things do. The 10-year time frame for narrative development maps, interestingly, onto the 20-year history of the post-Ark world the game inhabits. If the game develops its story over 10 years, players who follow it from the beginning will have watched the fictional world story unfold for half the length of its own history. The narrative present will have moved forward. Live service storytelling has a particular set of challenges that conventional game narrative doesn't face. The audience is present and active. They respond in real time. Their collective behaviour, the choices they make in the game world, can be incorporated into the story being told. The Stella Montis unlock showed that this isn't just theoretical. It's a design the studio has committed to. The major questions that the lore raises and that future content presumably needs to address include the true origin of the Ark machines, the current state of the Exodus colonies, the possibility of surface reclamation, the nature and goals of the Rogue Raider faction, and the full extent of the underground network beyond what currently appears in the game. Each of these questions, when answered, will retroactively change how the existing lore reads. That's the nature of a mystery structure. The answer recontextualizes the question. And in a well-built mystery, the answer was always visible in the existing evidence. You just had to find it. The Ark machine origin question, when answered, will be the most significant single lore revelation in the game's history. Whatever the answer is, it will change the community's understanding of who they're actually fighting and whether that fight can have a different ending than endurance. It will change the genre of the story from survival fiction to something else. The Exodus colony answer will change the moral landscape of the world. If the colonists are struggling in space, the story has a different texture than if they're thriving. If they're aware of the Ark invasion on Earth, the story has a different texture than if they're not. If they're directing it, the story changes genre again. Every possible answer opens different narrative territory. The surface reclamation question, if it becomes a live service narrative goal, would give the game's player community a collective objective of enormous scale and implications. Work toward it. Fail at it. Try again. The iteration between player effort and narrative consequence, played out over months or years of game time, would be a form of interactive storytelling with no close equivalent in the medium's history. The Rogue Raider faction, as it develops, will presumably provide a mirror for the Speranza community, a community that made different choices, that developed different values, that has different relationships to the Ark machines and the underground and the possibility of the surface. Encountering a fully developed rival community changes what Ark Raiders is about at a fundamental level. The expansion of the game's lore through updates, new codex entries, environmental changes, community events, and developer communications is the live service form of a serial narrative. Each update is a chapter. The release cadence is the publication schedule. The community is the readership, and it reads very closely. The retroactive reading that each new revelation enables is one of the pleasures specific to serialized fiction. When you know the answer, you go back and look at the question again with new eyes. Every time Ark Raiders adds a significant lore revelation, the existing maps and codex entries and vendor dialogues will be reread by the community looking for what they missed. That rereading is itself a form of engagement that keeps the world active between updates. The game doesn't have to be actively updating for the community to be actively thinking about it. The mystery structure ensures ongoing intellectual engagement because there's always something to look at again with new information. The community that grows around a game with this structure becomes over time a repository of institutional knowledge about the world. Long-term players will know things that new players don't. That knowledge differential creates a mentoring dynamic within the community that mirrors the Speranza community's own relationship between experienced raiders and newcomers. The game's critical reception, including the Best Multiplayer Game Award at the Game Awards 2025, validates the design philosophy at a commercial and cultural level. The world building is not just appreciated by lore obsessives, it is recognized as a meaningful component of why the game works even for players who don't engage with the codex. The reviewer who called the world full of curiosities and payoffs identified the specific quality that makes Ark Raiders' world building distinctive. It's not just detailed, it's structured. The curiosities lead somewhere. The payoffs exist. The world has been designed to reward the attention of people who pay it. The payoffs in a game like this are not just narrative revelations. They are moments when the world makes sense in a new way. When a detail you noticed weeks ago connects to something you just discovered. That moment of connection is the specific pleasure that dense, coherent world building produces. Ark Raiders produces it regularly. The future of Ark Raiders lore is genuinely open in a way that most game fiction's future is not. The story is not written. The answers have not been determined, or if they haven't been delivered. The world is in motion. Where it goes depends on creative decisions not yet made, community responses not yet given, and game events not yet played. That openness is uncomfortable in some ways. You can't know the end. You can't even be sure the end will be reached if the game's commercial life ends before its narrative ambitions are fulfilled. But the discomfort is also the aliveness of the thing. A story that isn't finished yet is a story you can still be part of. The Raiders of Speranza don't know how their story ends either. They know what happened. They know where they are. They don't know what's coming. They suit up every day and go topside anyway. Not because they know it will be okay, because staying underground is its own kind of death, and because the materials they bring back are the only reason the city keeps its lights on. There's something in that, something about the act of going out into uncertainty because the alternative is to stop, that resonates beyond the game. The Rust Belt is fictional. The condition it describes is not. The people who keep moving despite everything they know about what's out there are in every world, not just this one. The last extraction point is always the one you reach. The one you didn't reach is the one you learn from, if you're lucky enough to learn from it rather than just be lost to it. Every run counts, every return matters, every piece of the world you manage to bring back is one more reason the city below stays alive another day. That's what Ark Raiders is. That's what this world is built to express. 20 years underground, 2 decades of darkness owned and inhabited and made into something that keeps going. The machines are still up there, the sky is still theirs, but the dark is ours, and we're not done yet.